Chapter 367. Looking at Ling Yuna's expression, Imo Tiange was a bit uncertain about his relationship with Han Shiji. They recognized each other as soon as they saw each other, so they were obviously old acquaintances. Moreover, there is a sense of familiarity in their conversation, as if they knew each other's situation very well. It seemed they had known each other for a long time. They didn't seem to be enemies or friends. They both feared each other deeply, but they didn't intend to be enemies. However, since Ling Yunhe helped her, he wasn't her enemy for now. Fellow Taoist Ling, Imo Tiange, quickly smiled. "Thank you for helping me, fellow Taoist Ling." Ling Yunhe withdrew his gaze and waved at her. "Even if I didn't make a move, fellow Taoist Qin wouldn't have lost to Han. You don't have to thank me." Imo Tiange smiled. Her impression of this cloud-soaring crane became even more favorable. Although Han Shiji's strength was extraordinary, she was confident she wouldn't lose. However, Ling Yunhe scared him away, which saved her a lot of effort. After all, Han Shiji wasn't an ordinary person. If they really fought, it would be difficult for her to come out unscathed. The most rare thing was that Ling Yunhe helped her but didn't take credit for it. From this point of view, he was a smart person. He didn't force her to repay his kindness, but he made Imo Tiange have a good impression of him. Therefore, she inevitably had to think about the matter of Carefree Valley. "Why are you here, fellow Taoist Ling?" Imo Tiange asked. "Could it be that you couldn't sleep at night and came out to take a walk?" She said this with a smile. They were both core formation cultivators, so why would they need to sleep? Ling Yunhe knew she was teasing him. He also smiled and said, "If cultivators didn't need to sleep, I really wouldn't have been able to sleep." Imo Tiange didn't expect to get such an answer. She was startled, but she guessed why he said that, so she hesitated. Ling Yunhe helped her just now, so she should express her concern. However, if she continued to talk about it, it would inevitably involve Ling clan secrets. She came to Yunzhong to see the scenery and make friends with Yunzhong's cultivators, but she didn't want to get involved in these grudges. Since he was able to become a candidate for the sect leader, Ling Yunhe was naturally a sensitive person. As soon as he saw her expression, he thought of a reason. He smiled indifferently and changed the topic. "How did fellow Taoist Qin offend Han Shiji?" This person is a professor of the Southern Zhou country's Yushan Academy. He is famous for his ruthlessness and for hiding a dagger in his smile. Although fellow Taoist Qin's methods are extraordinary, you might not be able to guard against this person's sneak attack. Really, upon hearing what he said, Imo Tiange became a bit curious about Han Shiji. As far as I know, most Confucian cultivators cultivate their minds and cultivate their character. Why does Han Shiji have such a personality? Ling Yunhe shook his head and let out a sigh. Although this Han Shiji has a vicious personality, he is a genius in terms of cultivation. He liked to walk the unorthodox path, but he was very good at studying Confucian scriptures. What he cultivates is a Confucian mental cultivation method, but it is a mental cultivation method that he has researched and created himself. What? Imo Tiange was shocked. He's only in the core formation realm, but he can already create his own cultivation method. She couldn't be blamed for being so shocked. Creating a cultivation method wasn't a simple matter. The cultivation methods that existed in the cultivation world today were either adapted from cultivation methods left over from the Middle Ages era, or they were created by some big sects after several generations of patching and patching. Although some cultivation methods were created by cultivators themselves, these cultivators were all nascent soul cultivators, and all of them were outstanding geniuses. Nowadays, the spiritual aura of heaven and earth was scarce, and many cultivation methods couldn't be cultivated to the peak. Cultivators' use of spiritual aura was incomparable to that of ancient cultivators. Creating a cultivation method was indeed difficult for ordinary cultivators. Ling Yunhe understood Imo Tiange's surprise very well. He smiled helplessly and said, "That's why I said he's a genius." Seemingly intrigued by this topic, Ling Yunhe continued, "Fellow Taoist Qin isn't a cultivator from Yunzhong, so you might not understand the situation there. Southern Zhou country is the territory of Buddhist and Confucian cultivators. The Yushan Academy is the largest academy in southern Zhou country. Being able to become a professor in this academy isn't just because your cultivation level is high. Oh, I really haven't had much contact with Confucian cultivators, so I don't know about the academy situation. Could it be that professor isn't a title for core formation cultivators? Of course not. Ling Yunhe shook his head. In southern Zhou country, the academy is a school for Confucian cultivators. Ordinary Confucian aura refining disciples are the lowest level students in the academy. Once they build their foundation, they can become lecturers. Once they form their core formation, they can become assistant lecturers. And once they form their nascent soul, they can become professors. Mo Tiange was stunned. Han Shizhi's only a core formation cultivator, but he's already a professor. Correct. Ling Yunhe smiled. Only some publicly recognized geniuses who make contributions to the academy will be granted the title of high level. The reason why Han Shizhi is already a professor when he's only in the core formation realm is because he created a set of mental cultivation techniques for the Yushan Academy. Upon hearing the reason, Mo Tiange sighed and said, Yunzhong is indeed full of talented people. Not to mention others, the people she met today were all extraordinary. Black Moon Devil Monarch's divine sense was amazing. Han Shizhi was actually such a genius. Yang Chengji, who was silent most of the time at the trade fair, could easily take out so many beast cores, and Ling Yunhe, who was in front of her, had extraordinary strength. Mo Tiange didn't know whether Yuan Kong, Qin Yunzi, and Yong Ryu also had their own unique methods. Ling Yunhe's gaze fell on Mo Tiange. Fellow Taoist Qin, you don't need to praise others. Just now, when you fought against Han Shizhi, you didn't seem to be at a disadvantage at all. With this kind of strength, you can be considered one of the top experts in Yunzhong. At this point, he smiled and said, Sure enough, I didn't misjudge you. Mo Tiange just smiled after hearing Ling Yunhe's praise. Under the moonlight, the two of them were silent for a while. Mo Tiange suddenly asked, Fellow Taoist Ling, what's going on with the carefree valley you mentioned earlier? Ling Yunhe was stunned for a moment before he regained his composure. With a happy expression, he said, Fellow Taoist Qin, are you willing to accept my invitation? Mo Tiange said vaguely, We'll talk about it later. Ling Yunhe didn't get a definite answer, but he didn't feel disappointed. He quickly regained his composure. His gaze swept around, and he said with a smile, Are we going to talk here? Mo Tiange was stunned. She apologized. It's my fault. If you don't mind, fellow Taoist Ling, why don't you come in my small cave? Ling Yunhe didn't stand on ceremony and nodded happily. That's exactly what I was thinking. Asterisk, 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 and Mo Tiange was a bit speechless. This person really didn't know how to be polite. If it was someone else, even if they immediately agreed, they would at least say a few polite words, right? However, it seemed like he was a magnanimous person, and Mo Tiange happened to like this kind of person. Talking to this kind of person wasn't very tiring because he was smart enough, and because he was magnanimous, she didn't need to make wild guesses. This kind of feeling reminded her of Qin Shi, when he was still senior martial brother Qin. Although he had a lot of secrets, he was also smart and magnanimous. She suddenly missed Qin Shi. She wondered if his closed-door meditation was going smoothly. Fellow Taoist Qin? Ling Yunhe, who was about to take a step, saw that Mo Tiange was still standing in the same place. So he turned around and called out in confusion. Mo Tiange regained her train of thought. She patted her forehead and smiled at him. Please. The two of them walked silently until they reached the small cave where Mo Tiange was temporarily staying. Although the spiritual aura in this cave was ordinary, it was well arranged. Moonstones glittered, making it as bright as day. This time, Mo Tiange very politely served him a cup of tea for a guest. Ling Yunhe was very satisfied. This meant that their relationship had taken a step closer, right? After drinking the tea, Ling Yunhe spoke again. Fellow Taoist Qin, I don't want to pry into why you provoked Han Shizhi, but listen to my advice. You must be careful in the future. This person is narrow-minded and cares a lot about face. If he tripped over you, he'll definitely get it back. He underestimated you this time, but he might not be so lucky next time. Mo Tinga smiled and nodded. Thank you for reminding me, fellow Taoist Ling. I'll be careful. Ling Yunhe's gaze shifted, and he continued to smile. However, if fellow Taoist Qin is willing to help me, I'll definitely help you solve Han Shiji's problem in the future. Mo Tinga was stunned, but when she thought of Ling Yunhe's identity, she suddenly understood. Even if Han Shiji had an extraordinary status in Nanzhou, the person in front of her was one of the candidates for the head of Jiyin's sect, the biggest cultivation group in Yunzhou. He had a great chance of becoming the head of Jiyin's sect. With his help, she naturally wouldn't have to worry about Han Shiji. She raised her eyebrows and asked with a smile, Fellow Taoist Ling, if I agree to go to Carefree Valley with you, what benefits are you willing to give me? She asked directly, but Ling Yunhe was very happy. If fellow Taoist Qin is willing to help, I'll help you with anything you need as long as I can do it. Mo Tinga stared at him and continued to ask, what if I want to get a complete cultivation technique manual from Danxia sect? Ling Yunhe was stunned. Cultivation technique manual? Since this matter was already brought up, Mo Tinga simply said yes. I won't hide it from fellow Taoist Ling. I came to Yunzhong this time because I was ordered by my elders to get a cultivation technique manual from Danxia sect. However, fellow Taoist Ling also knows that who would be willing to give a profound cultivation technique to others? I'm unfamiliar with this place, and I don't have any friendship with Danxia sect, so it's really a headache for me. Is that so? Ling Yunhe pondered for a while, then glanced at Mo Tinga thoughtfully. Presumably, the cultivation technique fellow Taoist Qin is talking about isn't an ordinary cultivation technique, right? Yes. Mo Tinga smiled bitterly. To be honest, I don't have any confidence in this matter and think it's most likely impossible. However, this is my elder's order, so I have to do it. First, tell me what cultivation technique fellow Taoist wants. Ling Yunhe thought for a while, then looked at her and said, maybe I really have a way. It's the art of Sunu. Mo Tinga slowly said those 3 words, then looked up at Ling Yunhe. I wonder if fellow Taoist Ling has heard of it. The art of Sunu. Ling Yunhe muttered, as if he was recalling something. All of a sudden, he stared at Mo Tinga with a sharp gaze. The art of Sunu cultivated by pure female cultivators. Yes. Mo Tinga's expression was still calm. Several thousand years ago, my ancestor was a cultivator in Yunzhong. He once heard that Danxia sect had an art of Sunu cultivated by female cultivators with pure constitution. Chapter 368. For a while, neither of them spoke and fell into silence. Ling Yunhe held his teacup and stared at her for a while. No one knew what he was thinking. After a while, he finally couldn't help but ask, fellow Taoist Qin, what do you want this technique for? After saying that, he felt it was inappropriate, so he added, if it's not convenient, you don't have to answer. Mo Tinga glanced at him with a faint smile and shook her head. Sorry, it's really not convenient to answer. Ling Yunhe nodded and didn't say anything. He was just asking casually and didn't expect to get an answer. Who would answer this question? Pure constitution. If a female cultivator with a pure constitution existed in this world, how big of a storm would it set off in Yunzhong? The nascent soul cultivators had already reached the peak of cultivation in the mortal world, so they might not have any thoughts about it. However, the core formation cultivators definitely wouldn't let them go. Even he himself was shaken when he thought of this, and it took him a long time to calm himself down. However, he didn't think of Mo Tinga as the reason. How could a female cultivator with a pure constitution wander the world at will? Not to mention to say it out loud, so frankly. If he knew that Mo Tinga wasn't the only one who did this, and that Mo Yaoqing also ran amok in Yunzhong thousands of years ago, he would probably be so shocked that his jaw would drop. In a way, Mo Tinga not only inherited Mo Yaoqing's pure constitution, but she also inherited her courage. Ling Yunhe put this thought behind him and thought carefully. If fellow Taoist Qin is sure that this technique is in Danxia sect, I can find a way to get it. Mo Tinga's eyes brightened when she got a definite answer. If fellow Taoist Ling is willing to help me, I'll do my best to help Carefree Valley. Ling Yunhe was stunned for a moment. Then he showed a happy expression. Okay, it's settled then. After that, Ling Yunhe talked about the Carefree Valley without holding anything back, not leaving out any details. Since Mo Tiange didn't agree before, Ling Yunhe naturally left some leeway. Since they formed an alliance this time, he had to be honest about some things. Carefree Valley wasn't simple. It was indeed a blessed place in Yunzhong in ancient times, but now it was full of evil miasma, so it wasn't easy to enter. There are also some strange demonic beasts. Although they were core formation cultivators, they needed at least 5 or 6 people to enter. This was also the reason why Ling Yunhe wanted to invite her. However, after listening to Ling Yunhe for a while, Mo Tiange realized she actually didn't suffer any losses. This was because Carefree Valley was a secluded place, and Yunzhong's cultivators couldn't go there whenever they wanted. Although the miasma had reappeared, there were still some treasures left behind from the ancient times. As long as he could obtain even one, it would not be a loss. As for the worryless fruit that Ling Yunhe wanted, Mo Tiange didn't covet it at all. She had the spiritual attraction bead and did not lack pills. Although the effects of the pills were not as good as the fretless fruit, they were not too far off. If she helped Ling Yunhe obtain the worryless fruit, not only would she not have to worry about the art of Sunu, but she would also have Ling Yunhe to help her deal with Han Shizhi, the enemy she'd inadvertently made. It could be said that as long as she wasn't too unlucky, she would definitely profit from this deal. After a rough agreement, Ling Yunhe made an appointment to talk with her later and left. Mo Tiange stayed outside for a while. She restored the defensive formation, then entered the virtual sky world. As soon as he entered the virtual sky world, a golden light rushed over. Master! It was a tender voice. Mo Tiange knew it was Fei Fei without saying. But she also knew that the current Fei Fei wasn't the Fei Fei from before. In the past, the one who rushed over was acting coquettishly, but this one was most likely a disaster. Therefore, she took the opportunity to hug it and threw it across the room. This self-proclaimed divine beast Fei Fei knew how to enjoy life better than she did, so insisted on sitting on the praying mat. If she threw it everywhere like before, it would definitely protest. I'm telling you, if you want clear sky pills, you can't get them anymore. Do you think they're sugar pills? What if you eat them carelessly and cause problems? Fei Fei rolled on the praying mat across from her and raised its head. Who said I want clear sky pills? I'm not stupid. I haven't finished eating them last time. Mo Tiange cast a glance at it and poured herself a cup of tea. In fact, Fei Fei's awakening wasn't completely without benefits. For example, she didn't need to make tea by herself now. Those 2 stone sculpture puppets didn't have consciousness, so they couldn't make such good tea. Moreover, she had someone to chat with. Fei Fei was smart enough to understand everything and even gave her ideas. Oh, the tea's fragrance was refreshing. A divine beast was indeed a divine beast. It really knew how to enjoy life. Then what do you want to do? Can I just say hello? Fei Fei blinked its round eyes. It used to be very cute when it did this, but now, Mo Tiange only felt it was treacherous. She suddenly missed the old Fei Fei. Although it only knew how to eat and couldn't cook, it was still pleasing to the eye and cute. After thinking for a while, she turned around and asked, Where's Xiaohua? Why don't you go play with them? What's so fun about it? Fei Fei's head fell on the tea table. One can't talk, and the other is stupid to death. Master, what kind of spiritual beast did you find? Too vicious. Mo Tiange glared at it. You didn't know how to talk and were stupid to death before. That's the past, Fei Fei said disdainfully. When you were a baby, you still needed people to serve you. Mo Tiange stared at the sky for a while and said helplessly, Fei Fei, aren't you a divine beast? Why do you talk like a loafer in the mortal world? Shouldn't divine beasts from the distant past be ignorant of the mortal world and live in a place like paradise? Even if their temperaments weren't very gentle, they shouldn't be this treacherous, right? Fei Fei curled its lips and said, We used to live together with humans. Huh? Fei raised its head and stared at her. You don't know. Mo Tiange indeed didn't know. Only a few words were left about how people lived in the distant past era, and what was recorded in ancient books was only a legend. Fei raised its head and said slowly, "At that time, we spirits and humans lived together. There weren't that many cultivators, and there weren't that many disputes. It was very happy." Yearning slowly appeared in its eyes. That was an era that was also very far away from it. Although it had some memories, it wasn't a spiritual beast from that era after all. "Master," Fei said after a pause, "I've been thinking for a long time these past few days, and I think there's something wrong with this world." Mo Tiange put down the teacup and found that Fei's gaze was very serious. It stared at Mo Tiange and said, "From ancient times until now, spirits and demons have been separated. Although the human world has been a long time and there must have been great changes, it shouldn't have become like this. I don't remember much, but many things nowadays are very different from ancient times, and even completely opposite. This isn't normal." Mo Tiange didn't doubt that Fei had enough wisdom. It had awakened. Although it didn't have the strength of a divine beast, its intelligence wouldn't be reduced. However, she didn't know what to say about this conclusion. She was only a core formation cultivator, and her strength to explore the origin of the world was still too low. Seeing that Mo Tiange didn't know what to say, Fei sighed and lowered its head. "I know you don't understand. Forget it. Let's talk about it when you advance to the nascent soul realm. At that time, you should understand what I mean." Ever since it advanced, Fei had always looked sly, but now, Mo Tiange felt that its expression was full of melancholy. She could understand Fei's feelings. It inherited its ancestors' memory, but lived in the abandoned human world, so it must feel very lonely. However, this kind of loneliness was something she couldn't do anything about right now. Power and realm. These things even determine the height of one's thoughts. She said, "Advancing to the nascent soul realm isn't something that can be done in a day or two. If you just feel bored, you can talk to me about it, although I might not necessarily understand." Fei propped its head on the table and looked at her. It still looked as cute as before, but the feeling it gave off was completely different. After a while, it said, "Although you're not a good master, at least you're a good person." Mo Tiange glared at it. "How am I not a good master? I'll give you whatever I have. Where else can you find a master like me?" Why didn't it think about how it advanced? Fei stretched its limbs, then tilted its head and said, "You're talking about these spiritual panaceas? You can't use so many by yourself, and they came from nowhere. If you don't give them to us to eat, you'd be too stingy." Mo Tiange was speechless. But on second thought, Fei was right. The reason she was so generous was because she had too many, and it was too easy for her to obtain them. If she was really like those cultivators who obtained some spiritual panaceas with great difficulty, would she be willing to give them to them to eat? Before she built her foundation, she wasn't even interested in raising spiritual beasts because she knew she couldn't keep them alive. However, if you didn't have this kind of fated chance, we wouldn't be where we are today. Fei's gaze passed through the bamboo house and looked at the medicinal field in the distance. "You humans are really smart. To open up such an independent space, you need a great divine power that can shatter the void and some wonderful little tricks. Even the outstanding divine beasts like us, the 4 symbols and 5 spirits, can't do it. No wonder God left the human world to you." Mo Tiange was moved. "You said the human world now is very different from ancient times, and God left the human world to us humans. Do you know God's intention?" Fei blinked and tilted its head. "Is God something we can reach? Stop asking stupid questions." Asterisk, 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 she was ridiculed by her spiritual beast. Mo Tiange, touch her nose. "Then why did you say it's unusual?" "Because the human world is changing, but some rules shouldn't be changed," Fei said. "God left this world and divided the devil spirit realm, the immortal realm, and the devil realm to leave the human world to humans. But now, there are only humans in the human world. So many rules are completely different from before. Rules? What do you mean? It's God's righteousness. Fei Fei stroked the golden fur on its body. Don't ask me. I can't explain it clearly now. Teach me how to read these words first. I need you humans' ancient books and records to understand the current world. All right. Mo Tinga also knew that even if Fei Fei told her, she wouldn't really understand it now. The problem was there such an arrogant spiritual beast? From the beginning to the end, it was ordering its master around. Chapter 369. Since Fei Fei could speak, its intelligence wasn't lower than that of humans, so Mo Tinga had nothing to worry about. She gave it a lot of ancient books to study. As for herself, she was preparing to go out. Since she agreed to help Ling Yunhe, she had to do her best. She wasn't afraid of taking risks, but she always cherished her life. Ling Yunhe was a practical person. Within a few days, he brought her some necessities for this trip to Carefree Valley, as well as some information about Carefree Valley. Carefree Valley was a secret place. Few people in Yunzhong knew its exact location, but he told her the map of Carefree Valley and the situation there so frankly. His behavior was quite pleasing to Mo Tinga. Because of this, she was more willing to go on this trip. Working with people she liked, even if it was dangerous, made her feel carefree. After familiarizing herself with these situations, another half a month passed. The companions that Ling Yunhe mentioned finally gathered together and sent a letter to invite her over. Leaving her temporary cave, she went straight to the Ling clan's mansion at the top of Whitestone Mountain, according to Ling Yunhe. The Ling clan's mansion was located at the top of Whitestone Mountain, occupying the best spirit veins in Sky Snow City. Mo Tinga walked up the mountainside without any obstructions. When she reached the top, she couldn't help but stop and praise it. If Sky Snow City was a city of white snow, then the Ling clan's mansion was an ice palace. It occupied an area of several hundred square kilometers. Towering pavilions stretched as far as the eye could see, and all of them were made of glittering and translucent white stone. This white stone was different from the white stone of other buildings in Sky Snow City. It was slightly transparent, and just by looking at it, one could feel a trace of cold air coming from it. There was indeed air on it, but it was spiritual aura. Mo Tinga could see that this Ling clan's mansion was probably built using the best quality white stones from Baisha Mountain. Its spirit-gathering effect wasn't inferior to that of ordinary spirit-gathering formations. It was countless times better than the so-called spirit stone houses in Sky Snow City. This Ling clan was indeed a famous clan. Before she reached the door, a low-level cultivator came to greet her. "Senior, you're here. This way, please." Mo Tinga stared at him and was surprised. "Aren't you Xiaoshun?" This person was the low-level cultivator who guided her when she rented the cave. "Senior, you still remember me?" Xiaoshun was pleasantly surprised. Then he scratched his head and smiled shyly. "Junior knows Senior, so second uncle specially asked Junior to run errands and pick you up." "Oh, I see." Mo Tinga nodded, then followed him into Ling clan's mansion. "Is everyone else here?" she asked casually. Xiaoshun said as he led the way. "Senior, are you talking about second uncle's friends?" "We're all here. We're just waiting for you." "Is that so?" Mo Tinga asked casually. "Who are those people?" Xiaoshun looked embarrassed and said, "This. Senior, you should wait for my second uncle to introduce you. I don't have the qualifications to meet these seniors." He was only an insignificant aura-refining cultivator, not some genius disciple. Normally, he was just a runner in the clan. How could he have the qualifications to receive core formation cultivators? Letting him pick up Mo Tinga today was already an exception. Mo Tinga didn't mind. She nodded casually and followed Xiaoshun through the complicated pavilions. After a while, they finally arrived in front of a small independent building. Before the two of them could approach, 4 foundation building female cultivators came to greet them. They asked respectfully, "Is Senior Qin Wei here?" Xiaoshun had finished his task, so he stood respectfully to the side. Mo Tinga looked at the 4 foundation building female cultivators and said neither hurriedly nor slowly, "I'm Qin Wei." Upon hearing her affirmative answer, The four foundation building female cultivators immediately stepped aside and bowed. Greetings to Senior Qin. My master ordered us to come and welcome Senior. If she was an ordinary person, she would have been fooled by Ling Yunhe's ostentation. These four female cultivators were beautiful, graceful, and their cultivation levels weren't bad, but they were trained to be so obedient. Coming to welcome a guest like this not only didn't neglect the guest, but also made people feel the master was extraordinary. This move was indeed brilliant. Unfortunately, Mo Tiange was used to this. Although the 16 maids by Lord Daoist Jinghe's side had a lot of small problems in terms of beauty and temperament, they were much better than these two female cultivators. In front of outsiders, they were also well-mannered, gentle, and elegant. It had to be said that although Ling Yunhe knew how to enjoy himself, he was still a junior in the end and couldn't compare to an old monster like Lord Daoist Jinghe. Therefore, she just glanced at the four people faintly and nodded. That being the case, lead the way. The spiritual aura pressure of a core formation cultivator inadvertently spread out, so the four foundation building female cultivators didn't dare to neglect her. Two of them walked in front, and the other two followed behind, respectfully inviting her into the building. As soon as she stepped into the small building, someone immediately came to greet her with a smile. Fellow Daoist Qin, you're here. Mo Tiange looked up and saw that the person who greeted her was Ling Yunhe. At this moment, Ling Yunhe was even more graceful than he had been in the past few days. The first time she saw him, he looked like a downtrodden cultivator. The second time she saw him, he was neatly dressed and had an imposing appearance. This time, however, he looked refreshed and elegant. Mo Tiange couldn't help but imagine what he would look like the next time she saw him. She let her imagination run wild, but on the surface, she still politely returned Ling Yunhe's greeting. Fellow Daoist Ling, I came as promised. May I know what's next? Oh. Ling Yunhe immediately took over the conversation. Fellow Daoist Qin, these are my friends. I'll introduce them to you first. Mo Tiange followed his line of sight and saw four cultivators sitting in the hall. She couldn't help but be stunned. These four cultivators were all in the core formation realm. Two were in the middle stage, and the other two were in the early stage, just like Ling Yunhe said. However, what surprised her was that there was actually an acquaintance among them. It was the devil cultivator Yang Chengji, whom she met at the tea house in Sky Snow City that day. This is my good friend of many years. His surname is Tian, and his name is Jiqian. He's a cultivator from Five Elements Valley who specializes in the Dao of formations and rarely goes out. Ling Yunhe pointed at a middle-stage core formation cultivator and introduced him to Mo Tiange. The cultivator stood up and saluted Mo Tiange. I'm Tian Jiqian. Greetings to fellow Daoist Qin. Mo Tiange returned his salute with a smile. Fellow Daoist Tian. Judging from Tian Jiqian's appearance, he looked to be about 27 or 28 years old. He looked gentle and delicate, and his whole body was clean and tidy. His clothes were very simple. If it wasn't for the momentum he exuded, she wouldn't be able to guess that this young man, with a harmless smile on his face, was a middle-stage core formation cultivator. Mo Tiange noticed that his fingers were especially fair and clean, and his nails were trimmed just right. Apparently, he studied formations a lot on a daily basis. Fiddling with formation props was a delicate job, and all formation masters had very nimble fingers. This fellow Daoist's name is Tiancan. He's an individual cultivator. Ling Yunhe pointed at another middle-stage core formation cultivator and introduced him. Mo Tiange looked at him. This was a very thin and weak man dressed in black. His face was covered with a black scarf, and even his hands were wrapped in black cloth. He was also wearing a conical bamboo hat. His dressing was very similar to Yang Chengji's, but he didn't have the devil aura on his body. Fellow Daoist Tiancan. She greeted this person with a smile. This person just slightly opened his eyes, nodded at her, and cupped his hands slightly as a greeting. Then he closed his eyes and lowered his head again, looking like he didn't want to talk to her. Seeing this, Ling Yunhe smiled at Mo Tiange and said, This fellow Daoist Tiancan doesn't like to talk. Fellow Daoist Qin, please don't take offense. Mo Tinga nodded a show. She understood, then looked at the next person. This is Brother Yang. His name is Chengji, and he's from Northern Qilan Nation. He's the direct disciple of Guifeng, Devil Monarch. His devil art is very outstanding, and ordinary middle-stage core formation cultivators aren't his match. Guifeng, Devil Monarch? Mo Tinga asked softly. Ling Yunhe slapped his forehead, shook his head, and said with a smile, I forgot. Fellow Taoist Qin isn't from Yunzhong, so you don't know these things. Guifeng Devil Monarch is one of the 3 great devil monarchs in Yunzhong. He advanced to the late stage of the nascent soul realm several hundred years ago, and his name shook Yunzhong. He rarely has a match. This Brother Yang is his only direct disciple. Although Mo Tinga hadn't heard of the 3 great devil monarchs, since Ling Yunhe said he rarely had a match in Yunzhong, and his cultivation level was in the late stage of the nascent soul realm, he should be someone like Master Songfeng, right? In that case, as his only direct disciple, Yang Chengji's identity was quite extraordinary. It was no wonder he didn't introduce his background at the tea table that day. Presumably, in Yunzhong, the 3 words Yang Chengji had already explained his identity. Fellow Taoist Yang, we meet again. She curled up the corners of her mouth and saluted Yang Chengji. The 2 of them had dealt with each other and exchanged goods, so Yang Chengji was a bit more polite than last time. He stood up and saluted back. Fellow Taoist Qin. Upon seeing this, Ling Yunhe was a bit surprised. You've already met? Mo Tinga smiled and said, we met once at the tea table, but at that time, I didn't know fellow Taoist Yang's identity was extraordinary. Right after she finished speaking, Yang Chengji said with a wooden expression, I'm just an ordinary devil cultivator. How could I be extraordinary? Fellow Taoist Qin doesn't need to praise me. His words were really blunt. If people who didn't know him heard it, they might think he was arrogant and difficult to get along with. However, Mo Tinga could hear that he didn't want others to treat her differently because of her master's name, which gave her a better impression of him. She didn't get angry and apologized to Yang Chengji. I made a slip of the tongue. Fellow Taoist Yang, please don't take offense. Although she apologized, her tone was very indifferent and didn't seem to have any intention of flattering him. Upon hearing this, Yang Chengji politely saluted her again. Fellow Taoist Qin, you don't have to be so polite. The interaction between the 2 of them was witnessed by everyone else. Astonishment flashed in Ling Yunhe's eyes, but he didn't say anything. He then introduced the last person to Mo Tinga. Fellow Taoist Qin, this is my clan brother, Ling Yunfei. This person's age was similar to Ling Yunhe's, and their faces were indeed a bit similar. However, he looked a bit arrogant and unruly like a teenager, lacking a bit of maturity. As soon as Mo Tinga saw him, she knew he was a proud and arrogant descendant of an aristocratic family. Fortunately, Ling Yunfei was still polite to her. He stood up and saluted her. Fellow Taoist Qin, I've heard a lot about you. Fellow Taoist Yunfei is too polite. Where did I get my name? Mo Tinga said modestly and saluted him back. Ling Yunfei stared at her without blinking. These days, I've heard from my second brother that fellow Taoist Qin has a profound cultivation level and a steady character. What's rare is that you're also very young and beautiful. I didn't believe him, but now that I've seen you, I know what he said is true. Asterisk, 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 these words were indeed praising her. But Ling Yunfei's gaze was a bit too passionate, and Mo Tinga couldn't help but smile bitterly in her heart. In the past, when she was still an aura-refining or foundation-building cultivator, how could other cultivators praise her like this? Now, she was already in the core formation realm. Among core formation cultivators, female cultivators were really rare, so she seemed to stand out from the crowd. That's enough. Ling Yunhe promptly said, let's get to know each other. From now on, we'll be companions on this trip to Carefree Valley. Chapter 370. The 6 people saluted each other and sat down. Mo Tinga found that the 6 of them had one thing in common. They all looked very young. Tian Jiqian, who looked the oldest, was only about 30 years old, while the others looked like they were in their early 20s. This wasn't strange. Ling Yunhe was only about 100 years old, and he was a disciple of a famous sect. Juyin sect's outstanding disciple caught his attention, so he wouldn't be too inferior. Ling Yunhe sat in the host seat and said, "Everyone, I'm the initiator of this trip to Carefree Valley, so I probably know more about Carefree Valley than you do. So, I'll be the leader of this trip. Do you have any objections?" His tone was calm, and his speech was neither fast nor slow. He didn't seem overbearing, but he was full of confidence. Mo Tinga thought it was no wonder Ling Yunhe was listed as a candidate for the head of Juyin sect. Not only was his cultivation level outstanding, but his behavior was also outstanding. What was rare was that he acted calmly, but also seemed magnanimous. He felt that his seat should be his, so he didn't refuse politely. However, she didn't know this person's temperament. If he didn't have evil intentions, they could be friends. Tian Jiqian smiled and said, "Of course. This trip is for Brother Ling, so of course Brother Ling will be the leader." Ling Yunfei didn't say anything. He just sat in his seat, spinning the teacup in his hand and looking up from time to time. Of course, he didn't have any objections. This was Ling Yunhe's business and also the Ling family's business. Ling Yunhe once said that because of the conflict between the sect and the family's interests, it wasn't convenient for him to invite acquaintances. However, he invited Ling Yunfei, which showed that Ling Yunfei was someone he could really trust. Ling Yunhe's gaze fell on the other three people. Yang Chengji said, "I have no objections." Mo Tinga smiled faintly, which could be considered an answer. The black-masked Tianqian just opened his eyes slightly, then closed them again. Since no one has any objections, this matter is settled. Ling Yunhe paused for a moment, his gaze sweeping across the 5 people seated before he slowly said, "I'm sure all of you know what kind of place the Carefree Valley is. With our strength, it won't be difficult for us to escape unscathed after we enter. However, if we don't work together, it's very possible that we'll perish in the Carefree Valley. Hence, I hope that all of you can guarantee that once we enter the Carefree Valley, all of you will listen to my instructions." At this point, he smiled and added, "I can also guarantee that I will put your lives first." Tian Jiqian and Ling Yunfei nodded in agreement, but Tian Kan and Mo Tinga didn't say anything. Only Yang Chengji's eyes flashed, and he said in a low voice, "As long as fellow Taoist Ling doesn't break his promise, there will naturally be no problem." Ling Yunhe nodded and smiled. "As for whether or not we can find the carefree fruit, it all depends on our luck. Even if I can't find it, I will still abide by our previous agreement. I will fulfill all the conditions that I promised everyone. I trust Brother Ling's character," Tian Jiqian said first. The others didn't have any objections. Mo Tinga wondered what kind of price Ling Yunhe paid to invite these people. If she was alone, although she didn't need any treasures or spirit stones, those two things wouldn't be easy to do. Seeing this, Ling Yunhe said, "That being the case, let's discuss the plan for this trip." Although it was called a discussion, in fact, he was the only one talking. Ling Yunfei occasionally interjected, and the others just asked some questions that interested them. Ling Yunhe was very well prepared. He had prepared the route, talismans, medicinal pills, and so on. He told everyone the rough route and how to deal with some matters. After that, he distributed some necessary small items to them. Mo Tinga looked around. There were some detoxification medicinal pills, sound-transmitting talismans, protective talismans, and a map that Ling Yunhe had prepared for each of them. Mo Tinga felt a little relieved. Seeing that Ling Yunhe handled things in an orderly manner, this trip should be safe. After spending about 2 hours explaining the plan, Ling Yunhe asked, "Does anyone have any questions?" Everyone shook their heads. He even considered some unexpected situations, so he couldn't think of anything to ask now. As for the rest, they could only act according to the circumstances. That being the case, let's determine the time of departure. Do you have anything else to deal with? After Ling Yunhe asked, Tianqian, who hadn't spoken since the beginning, opened his eyes and said, "I still have something to do. I need 2 days." Mo Tinga frowned slightly. This Tiansan's voice was hoarse like a sharp thorn, which was very uncomfortable to listen to. Ling Yunhe nodded slightly and asked, "What about the other fellow Taoists? If you have something to deal with, please deal with it quickly. We don't have much time left." Mo Tiange had already inquired about it. The Juyin sect's head selection had been prepared for more than a year, and the final day would be in 2 months. Because of the internal strife in the Ling clan, Ling Yunhe was confirmed to be the candidate several months ago. After returning from Carefree Valley, he had to adjust his condition, so he really didn't have much time left. The others shook their heads. There was no need to mention Tian Jiqian and Ling Yunfei. Yang Chengji had been in Sky Snow City for several days, so he must have finished his business. Mo Tiange didn't have anything important to do now, so she could leave at any time. "Then, we'll leave in 3 days. Is there any problem?" This time, even Tianqian shook his head. Seeing that no one had any objections, Ling Yunhe said, "Good. 3 days later, at the same time, let's gather here. What do you think?" Everyone agreed. Then they left. Tian Jiqian, Yang Chengji, and the others stayed in the Ling Mansion. Only Mo Tiange and Tianqian left the Ling Mansion one after another. Just as she was about to return to her cave to continue meditating, a fierce momentum suddenly swept from behind. Mo Tiange leaned to one side, and the fierce momentum brushed past. A white stone not far from her made a loud boom sound and shattered into powder. At that moment, Mo Tiange flipped her hand, and the heaven and earth fan appeared in her hand. She waved it lightly to block the next spiritual aura attack. Like a flash of lightning, she floated several hundred feet away in an instant. The attacker exclaimed in surprise. Although the art of teleportation could be said to be one of the most basic spells for core formation cultivators, there were still differences in skill. Ordinary teleportation could only cover a distance of about 100 feet, and the distance Mo Tiange teleported to was already considered extremely far. But in the next moment, the attacker immediately chased after her and ruthlessly attacked her with another spiritual aura attack. This person's attack technique was very simple. He didn't use magic weapons or any fancy tricks. He just used all the spiritual aura in his body to meet force with force. Mo Tiange didn't even have time to breathe a sigh of relief when she felt the fierce momentum pressing down on her again. She was a bit annoyed. She didn't provoke anyone, so why was this person so relentless? She no longer held back. She waved the white silk handkerchief to protect herself. Then she fumbled in her Chinquan bag and took out the spirit cloud's rui, smashing it towards the attacker. Boom! This loud noise was even louder than the previous one. The attacker quickly retreated, but he still didn't have time to get out of the attack range. With a muffled groan, he was hit by the spiritual aura explosion triggered by the spirit cloud's rui and fell down. But he quickly steadied himself. He raised his hand, and a small shield appeared in front of him. This shield was obviously a high-grade magic weapon. It emitted a sparkling blue light and instantly protected him. Mo Tiange withdrew the spirit cloud's rui and didn't follow up with another attack. Instead, she stared at the person in front of her and asked with a frown, "Fellow Taoist Tianqian, what's the meaning of this?" The person who attacked her from behind was Tianqian, who was having a gathering with them just now. When the spiritual aura explosion triggered by the spirit clouds rui stabilized, Tianqian waved his hand and removed the shield. He stared at Mo Tiange. His fierce momentum gradually disappeared. He cupped his hands and saluted her, then said in a harsh voice, "Fellow Taoist Qin, you're very skillful." Upon hearing this, Mo Tiange understood that she was being tested. Although Qiansan's attack was fierce, he didn't intend to kill her, so he didn't use his magic weapon. But this person was obviously a martial cultivator. Such fierce aura definitely couldn't be possessed by other cultivators. Her companions this time were really interesting. She, Ling Yunhe, and Ling Yunfei were Taoist law cultivators. Tian Jiqian was also a Taoist law cultivator, but he was a formation master. Yang Chengji was a devil cultivator, and Tianqian was a martial cultivator. Mo Tiange said, "Fellow Taoist Tianqian, You didn't use your magic weapon, but you fought me with your aura alone. Your means are extraordinary. Tiankin was wrapped in black clothes and wore a bamboo hat on his head. Only a pair of half-closed eyes could be seen on his body, and no expression could be seen on his face. He looked at Mo Tianga and said flatly, "I'm a martial cultivator. Why would I need a magic weapon in a fight of magical powers? A loss is a loss. Fellow Taoist Qin, you don't have to give me face." Although what he said was reasonable, he didn't use his weapon, so he didn't use his full strength. Of course, Mo Tianga also didn't use her full strength, so she just said faintly, "Fellow Taoist Tiancan, do you have anything else to say? If not, I'll take my leave first." Tiancan was stunned. Seeing that she wasn't interested in him, he had no choice but to leave. "I'm going to take care of my business. Fellow Taoist Qin, we'll meet again." Mo Tianga cupped her hands at him and left without saying anything. When she was far away, Tiancan sighed, chose the path down the mountain, and walked away. At that moment, Mo Tianga stopped. She turned around and stared at Tiansan's back with a frown, lost in thought. What's this Tiansan's background? Did he suddenly test her out of curiosity, or did he have some other intentions? In terms of fights of magical powers, she had a lot of treasures now, so she wasn't afraid of him. However, on this trip to Carefree Valley, he was her companion. If he had any ulterior motives, wouldn't it be dangerous? Fellow Taoist Qin. Just as she was thinking, someone called her from behind. Mo Tianga turned around and saw Ling Yunhe standing not far from her. He looked pensive as he stared at the scene of devastation not far from them. Fellow Taoist Ling. Ling Yunhe shifted his gaze, smiled at her, and pointed at the place where they fought just now. Fellow Taoists, you're very skillful. White spirit stones are very hard, but they were unexpectedly damaged by you. Tiansan's strike turned a huge white stone into powder, and Mo Tianga's spirit cloud's Rui also blasted a huge hole in the ground. Mo Tianga smiled and said apologetically, "I'm really sorry. I damaged this place, hey?" Ling Yunhe waved his hand and said, "Fellow Taoist Qin, why are you so polite? I'm not such a petty person. I'm just amazed by your amazing divine powers." Fellow Taoist Ling, you flatter me. Mo Tianga didn't really take it seriously. But since she was in someone else's territory, she still had to be polite. She asked, "Fellow Taoist Ling, why did you chase after me?" Ling Yunhe shook his head and said with a smile, "I just heard some noise and came out to take a look. If fellow Taoist Qin wants to go back and rest, I won't disturb you." Mo Tianga smiled and said, "Since that's the case, I'll take my leave first." Chapter 371. Mo Tianga didn't notice that after she left, Ling Yunhe stared at the traces left by the two of them in silence. After a long time, he shook his head and muttered, "Not simple." Then he slowly walked back to the Ling family's mansion with his hands behind his back. His brows were tightly knitted, but it was hard to tell whether he was happy or worried. 3 days later, the 6 people gathered at the Ling family's mansion again. This time, Ling Yunhe didn't put on airs and directly invited them in. After confirming that there were no mistakes, the 6 people turned into flight lights and disappeared into the sky. Carefree Valley was located at the border between Eastern Tang and Northern Lin Kingdom. Sky Snow City was located in the north of Eastern Tang Country. It was only 6 to 7 days' journey from Northern Lin Country. The cultivation of the 6 of them wasn't bad. Even the 2 early-stage core formation cultivators had many spirit artifacts on them, and their strength was extraordinary. The 6 people sped up. 5 days later, they arrived at Mount Jialing, where Carefree Valley was located. Mount Jialing was a mountain range at the border between Eastern Tang and Northern Lin Kingdom. It stretched for hundreds of miles and towered into the clouds. To the southeast of the mountain was Eastern Tang's Jialing Town, and to the north was Northern Lin Kingdom's famous Devil's Domain, Star Descent City. Mount Jialing was just a name in Eastern Tang, but people in Northern Lin Kingdom were used to calling it Star Descent Mountain. Carefree Valley was hidden in this mountain. 6 flight lights landed on an uninhabited peak of Mount Jialing. It was Mo Tianga's group of 6. "Is this the place?" Tian Jiqian asked in a very surprised tone. Mo Tinga looked around and saw that this peak was bare except for some stones. There wasn't even a trace of spiritual aura. It really didn't look like a paradise from the distant past era. No wonder Tian Jiqian was so surprised. Ling Yunhe took out his map and confirmed, yes, this is the place. Mo Tinga also took out her own map. The entrance to Carefree Valley was near here, but there wasn't a trace of spiritual aura or formation around. How could they enter? The five people's gazes were fixed on Ling Yunhe. Ling Yunhe calmly took out something from his Chinquan bag. Soul restraining bead. Ling Yunfei blurted out in surprise. Mo Tinga stared at him with rapt attention. She saw that the Lingyun was holding a huge round bead in his hand. The bead emitted a faint light, and the surface of the bead was undulating like water ripples. She could confirm that this bead was a high-rank treasure. Ling Yunfei called it the God-restraining bead. Could it be used to break seals? Ling Yunfei's expression changed indeterminately. He looked at Ling Yunhe and hesitated over and over again. In the end, he still asked, "Second brother, where did you get this God-restraining pearl?" Ling Yunhe smiled and glanced at him with a calm expression. "Don't worry. Great-grandfather Seven himself gave his permission." Oh. Ling Yunfei heaved a sigh of relief and looked much better. So this is the spirit-restraining pearl of the Ling family? Tian Jiqian looked at the pearl in Ling Yunhe's hand with interest. Ling Yunhe nodded. That's right. With this item, it will be much easier for us to enter Carefree Valley. Upon seeing Mo Tinga staring at the soul-restricting bead in Ling Yunhe's hand, Ling Yunfei approached her, then whispered, "Fellow Taoist Qin doesn't know, right? This spirit-restraining pearl is our Ling family's heirloom. It's always been kept by our nascent soul ancestors. This pearl has a strong restraining effect on spiritual aura and divine comprehension. If it's used properly, you can walk unimpeded between seals." Upon hearing this, Mo Tinga was inwardly frightened. Being able to walk unimpeded between seals was even more powerful than the Tai Chi 8 diagrams in her hand. The Tai Chi 8 diagrams contain the profound principles of yin and yang, the 5 elements, and the 8 diagrams. It could stabilize yin and yang and sort out spiritual aura. In a place where spiritual aura was chaotic and the 5 elements intersected, the Tai Chi 8 diagrams could display its divine power. However, in terms of breaking seals, this thing could only be used as an aid, so it was inferior to the God-restraining pearl. And Mo Yaoqing was indeed a genius, but Yunzhong was so big, so there were naturally other genius cultivators who could refine other treasures. Besides, in terms of profoundness, the Tai Chi 8 diagrams wasn't inferior to the God-restraining pearl. It was just inferior in terms of breaking seals. I see. This pearl is really magical, Mo Tinga praised. Ling Yunfei looked proud and said, "Usually, the core formation juniors of our clans can't even see this God-restraining pearl. Our nascent soul ancestors, are you ready? It's time to go in." Ling Yunfei was interrupted by Ling Yunhe. After Ling Yunhe finished speaking, he glared at Ling Yunfei before turning around and leaving. Ling Yunfei was embarrassed by his stare and didn't dare to say anything else. He rubbed his nose and followed Ling Yunfei. Mo Tinga laughed inwardly. This Ling Yunfei seemed to be about the same age as Ling Yunhe, but his cultivation level and way of handling things were much more childish. Presumably, he just formed his gold core and hadn't learned how to restrain himself, right? The secret treasure in the hands of his ancestors should be kept a secret, but he just casually mentioned it. The 5 people followed Ling Yunhe down from the top of the mountain. There were rocks everywhere on Mount Jilling. It seemed there wasn't much rain, so plants rarely survived. That was why the landscape was like this. These rocks were strangely shaped. As they walked among them, they were surrounded by jagged rocks and towering peaks that looked like ferocious beasts. The whole mountain was full of rocks, and they couldn't even find a complete path. Ling Yunhe, on the other hand, walked through the rocks with ease. When they entered the depths of the rocks, there were only rocks and yellow soil at first, but gradually, there were a few traces of green. In the end, Ling Yunhe stopped in front of an ancient tree. This ancient tree was dozens of feet tall. Although it didn't have many green leaves, its branches and vines were intertwined, covering the sky and the earth. It stood alone among the rocks, squeezed to the point where there was only a little living space. However, its branches and leaves covered the land within a radius of 300 meters. Brother Ling, this is? Tian Jiqian asked doubtfully when he saw Ling Yunhe stopped. Ling Yunhe didn't answer. Instead, he raised the soul-restricting pearl in his hand, made a hand seal, and poured spiritual aura into the pearl. With the input of spiritual aura, the ripple-like light around the soul-restricting pearl fluctuated more and more violently, and the hazy light became brighter and brighter. Suddenly, Ling Yunhe shouted. The soul-restricting pearl suddenly burst into a dazzling light and shot towards the ancient tree. Buzz! A dull sound echoed in the six people's ears. This sound wasn't harsh, but it was too deep, as if it directly hit their eardrums and knocked on the depths of their brains. Everyone's faces showed unbearable expressions. Although they were all powerful core formation cultivators who could easily endure a fight of magical powers, even if they were seriously injured, they were helpless in the face of this kind of sound. This was a human body's weakness. As long as they were still human and hadn't ascended, they couldn't get rid of it. Emo Tinga suddenly thought of something. Although she also felt this sound was very irritating, she didn't feel very uncomfortable. Maybe it was because she practiced the soul-refining art? If that was the case, couldn't she rely on her powerful divine sense to make similar magic weapons to put her opponent in a passive position? This thought flashed in her mind. Soon, Ling Yunhe put away the soul-restricting pearl and said, "Everyone, let's go in." Mo Tinga regained her composure and saw faint spiritual aura fluctuations coming from the ancient tree. Brother Ling, how do we go in? Tian Jiqian looked at the ancient tree with a blank expression. Although this tree obviously had some mysteries, because it used the soul-restricting pearl, he couldn't see an entrance. Ling Yunhe smiled. "Everyone, please follow me." He shook his sleeves and flew to the ancient tree. Seeing this, everyone followed suit. Mo Tinga stopped on a branch of the ancient tree. She looked down and suddenly realized something. There was a hole on the branch of the ancient tree. It was just that the hole wasn't big and the spiritual aura fluctuations inside were very obscure, so they didn't notice it at all. Ling Yunhe didn't say anything. His body emitted a protective spiritual light, and he jumped down. The other 5 people immediately followed Ling Yunfei, followed by Tian Jiqian and Yang Qingji. Mo Tinga glanced at Tian Can, then used the art of primordial origin to form a protective spiritual aura shield around her. She also jumped down. In the darkness, she heard the whistling sound of the wind. She kept falling down. Mo Tinga released her divine sense and immediately frowned. Sure enough, the restriction here also had a suppressive effect on divine sense. As long as it was an ancient land, most of the restrictions left behind by the cultivators would suppress one's divine sense, so she wasn't too surprised. In addition, the spiritual aura here was indeed chaotic. There seemed to be many kinds of restrictions intertwined with each other, and there was also a strange, filthy aura, which was quite complicated. Even weaker core formation cultivators might not be able to withstand this place. The various auras here were too chaotic, which could easily destroy the balance of a cultivator's body and corrode his meridians. Presumably, Ling Yunhe brought the soul-restraining bead with this in mind. With this bead restraining the spiritual aura, it could ensure that the early-stage core formation cultivators among them could also enter smoothly. With this thought in mind, Mo Tinga secretly took out the 8 trigrams diagram from her Chinquan bag and put it in her sleeve. This caused the spiritual qi around her to become much gentler. After a while, the glimmer of the soul-restraining bead stopped. Then Mo Tinga also stepped on the ground. When Tian Can also landed, the 6 of them had already jumped down. Everyone. Ling Yunhe turned around and faced everyone. We've already discussed what to do on this trip. Once we get out of here, we'll arrive at the Carefree Valley. I'll emphasize one more thing. You'd better not be more than 300 meters away from me. Without the soul-restraining bead, even if we're already in the core formation realm, our cultivation levels will still be suppressed by the chaotic auras in the Carefree Valley. If we encounter 1 or 2 monsters, we'll be in danger. Everyone nodded. When they came down just now, they already felt this place wasn't simple. The spiritual aura was so chaotic, and there was also devil aura and filthy aura. In this kind of environment, even if they had great divine abilities, they'd be lucky if they could display half of their power. Okay, let's continue, Ling Yunhe said, then turned around to explore the way. At that moment, Mo Tiange felt the glimmer above her head dimmed. The spiritual aura changed slightly, and the entrance to the ancient tree above her disappeared. Ling Yunfei looked up and felt a bit uneasy. Second brother, must we use the soul-restraining bead to open this entrance? Ling Yunhe put the soul-restraining bead into his robe. While leading the way, he said, "That's not the case. In fact, this isn't the only entrance to the Carefree Valley. It's just that the other entrances are very dangerous. They either have monsters or strange auras. Only here, the restriction is relatively weak. It'll be fine as long as we break it." Why did this restriction close automatically? This question made Ling Yunhe sigh. The restriction techniques of the distant past era were much more brilliant than the ones we have today. The Carefree Valley was a paradise in the distant past era, so there must have been people with great divine abilities cultivating here. Therefore, these restrictions must have been left behind by cultivators whose realms were much higher than ours. The restrictions in the cultivation world today can't compare to the profundities of their divine abilities. Once Ling Yunhe finished speaking, a light appeared in front of them. They walked towards the light, passed through the rocks and soil, and suddenly saw the light. Chapter 372. Once they left the cave, spiritual aura and other messy auras rushed toward them. Mo Tiange looked around. She was surrounded by overgrown weeds and tangled vines. The air was filled with miasma, and the sky was dim. This Carefree Valley didn't seem special, but the messy auras made everyone frown. For cultivators, miasma was only a bit troublesome because they needed to protect their bodies with spiritual aura at all times. The worst thing was that it was mixed with filthy aura. Filthy aura was a kind of special aura that existed in the cultivation world. No one knew how it was produced, but this kind of filthy aura could indeed be found in some places. It could erode magic weapons and bodies, deprive magic weapons of spiritual aura, and cause living things to lose their vitality and die. The meaning of its existence seemed to be destruction. Cultivators in this world all avoided it like snakes and scorpions, whether they were Taoist or Buddhist cultivators, Confucian or devil cultivators. However, the spiritual aura in this Carefree Valley was indeed very rich. Mo Tiange sensed her surroundings and thought to herself, this place was called a paradise in ancient times, and it really wasn't just for show. If it weren't for the devil aura, miasma, and filthy aura, the spiritual aura here would be denser than the spiritual aura inside her virtual sky world. Unfortunately, for the cultivators of today, it was impossible for them to expel the chaotic qi outside. They could only absorb the spiritual qi in this place. Thus, this paradise could only become a dangerous place. Everyone, Ling Yunhe was about to speak, but he suddenly frowned. The crescent-shaped jade knife appeared in his hand, and he made a defensive posture. At that moment, everyone except Ling Yunfei was on high alert. Huh? Ling Yunfei stared at them blankly, somewhat at a loss. There's a change in the situation. Ling Yunhe shouted and waved the jade knife in his hand, which shone like a silver moon. After Ling Yunhe finished speaking, Ling Yunfei finally realized that something was surging towards them like a tidal wave. He hurriedly shook his sleeves, and 2 flying swords, one big and one small, flew out of his body. Mo Tiange's frown deepened. Among the 6 people, her divine sense was the most powerful. Although it was suppressed by the restrictions here, she could still clearly sense the situation around her. The thing that was rushing towards them was definitely not an ordinary spiritual object. It carried a heavy aura of filth. What kind of strange thing was that? The filthy chi was meant for destruction. If it was a living creature, how could it still be alive after being infected by it? Soon, more and more people in the group of 6 had their expressions change. They were all outstanding core formation cultivators. Even if their divine senses were a bit inferior to Mo Tienga's, it wouldn't be by much. Fellow Taoists. Ling Yunhe cast a meaningful glance at Mo Tienga and said, "It seems the situation in Carefree Valley has changed. Everyone should be careful." There was no need for him to remind them. Everyone was ready to fight. Among them, which one of them hadn't experienced countless hardships and dangers? Even Ling Yunfei, who looked the most immature, had a solemn expression on his face at this moment. 2 flying swords circled around his body as a precaution. As those things came closer and closer, everyone's expressions became more and more serious. They had already discovered that there were definitely over 100 monsters rushing towards them, and each of them had strength exceeding stage 4. With a buzzing sound, the jade knife in Ling Yunhe's hand flew up first and fiercely slashed at the grass. Meow! A huge lynx rolled to the side with blood oozing out of its lower abdomen and cried out in pain. Meow! Meow! Immediately afterward, many lynx leaped over the grass and rushed towards them. "These are monsters," Yang Qingji shouted. He spread his arm, and a black banner appeared in his hand. The banner was embroidered with a ferocious ghost bearing its fangs. This banner was surging with devil aura, so it should be his natal magic weapon. The other people also noticed that these lynx's eyes were red and glowing, and their bodies were shrouded in black aura. They looked very frightening. Obviously, they weren't ordinary spiritual objects, nor were they monsters. They were mutated monsters. Brother Tian, retreat. Yunfei, stay in the middle and coordinate. Fellow Taoist Yang, fellow Taoist Qin, and fellow Taoist Tianqian. Each of us will take a direction. Ling Yunhe immediately made a decision. The other 5 people didn't hesitate and immediately stood in the positions he said. Although Tian Jiqian was in the middle stage of the core formation realm, he was a cultivator from 5 Elements Valley and could be considered a formation master, so he was a bit weaker than ordinary cultivators in fights of magical powers. As for Ling Yunfei, he was the most immature among the people present and wasn't as steady as the other 3. Letting the 2 of them stand in the back was indeed a more appropriate arrangement. However, Mo Tienga couldn't help but think that among the 5 people, Tian Jiqian and Ling Yunfei were Ling Yunhe's good friends and younger brothers. Letting them stand in the middle, could it be considered that he was deliberately holding back his strength in case they turn against each other? If so, Ling Yunhe could be considered cunning. If not, why did he choose Tian Jiqian, a formation master, and Ling Yunfei, a somewhat immature brother, as helpers while inviting Yang Qingji, Tianqian, and her 3 people who were both good at fighting and decisive to go with him? Wasn't he afraid that they would be at a disadvantage if they turned against each other? In her opinion, Tian Jiqian definitely couldn't defeat her or Tianqian, and Ling Yunfei and Yang Qingji were also incomparable. Mo Tienga couldn't think of an answer to this question, so she shook her head and threw it to the back of her mind, focusing on fighting the enemies. After taking their positions, the 6 people began to kill the hundreds of demon cats surging towards them in an orderly manner. After Ling Yunhe's crescent moon jade knife left his hand, it flew up and down. Under his control, it immediately opened a bloody path in the crowd of demon cats. But when these demon cats smelled the blood, they became even more excited and pounced on Mo Tienga as if they didn't care about their lives. Mo Tienga frowned. Instead of taking out her heaven and earth fan, she took out Lord Taoist Jinghe's magic weapon, the flying sword, and also controlled the flying sword to kill the demon cats. As soon as Yang Qingji unfolded his ghost face banner, he heard what seemed to be the screams of ferocious ghosts. His devil aura swept towards the demon cats. Whenever his devil aura touched a demon cat, it immediately let out a sharp cry. Soon, they stopped breathing as if their vitality had been sucked out. Tian Can held a claw in each of his hands. Whenever a demon cat approached him, it would be cut down by his sharp claws. Of the two flying swords beside Ling Yunfei, the smaller one kept circling him, while the bigger one flew out from time to kill several demon cats. Only Tian Jiqian held a jade plate in his hand, paying attention to the battle in front of him. Mo Tiange glanced at the jade plate and saw the 5 elements, yin, yang, and 8 trigrams carved on it. It seemed to be a magic weapon related to formations. The cultivation levels of these demon cats weren't high, but they weren't low either. On average, they were a bit stronger than 4th-ranked demonic beasts, but a bit weaker than 5th-ranked demonic beasts. Occasionally, a few demon cats appeared. Although they were comparable to 5th-ranked demonic beasts, they were all experienced core formation cultivators, so they couldn't pose a threat and were quickly killed. Soon, more than half of the hundreds of demon cats were dead or injured, and the smell of blood in the air became stronger and stronger. Ling Yunhe felt something was wrong, so he frowned and pondered. All of a sudden, he thought of something. He immediately withdrew the crescent moon jade knife, took out the soul-restraining bead from his robe, and shouted, "Yunfei, go! Everyone be careful. After these demons die, the filthy aura will drift away, and the filthy aura around us is getting thicker and thicker." Everyone was shocked to hear that. After sensing for a while, they realized what Ling Yunhe said was right. The filthy aura had almost surrounded them. "Second brother, what should we do?" Ling Yunfei took over Ling Yunhe's position and blocked one direction, while Ling Yunhe retreated to the center. "We'll fight and retreat at the same time." Ling Yunhe said, "Fellow Taoist Qin, you and Yunfei will lead Brother Tian and lead the way. Fellow Taoist Tian, Can, fellow Taoist Yang, please bring up the rear. I'll be in the middle of you and use the soul-restraining bead to restrain the aura and restrictions around us." The other 5 people didn't say anything. They quickly adjusted their positions and did as Ling Yunhe said. Although there were many demon cats, they weren't difficult to deal with. The worst thing was that after they killed the demon cats, the filthy aura on their bodies would spread out and surround them. Therefore, everyone quickly judged the situation. They couldn't kill the demon cats, so they could only repel them. This brought about some difficulties in carrying out their plan. After these demon cats smelled the smell of blood, they became extremely ferocious and charged forward without any regard for their lives. Although they were slightly weaker, they were in groups. They couldn't kill them, but they had to block them all. It was really difficult. The one who felt the most constrained was Tian Can. He was a martial cultivator, and every move he made seemed to be fatal. Facing this situation, he could only block them with his aura. Ling Yunhe saw through him. He sighed and said, "Brother Tian, I'll have to trouble you." Tian Jiqian chuckled. "Since I'm here, how can I do nothing?" He walked to the center, raised the jade plate in his hand, made a hand seal, and shouted softly. A stream of spiritual aura was injected into the jade plate. The jade plate shone brightly, and the 5 elements, yin, yang, and 8 trigrams on it began to operate. Mo Tiange's eyes brightened. She could be considered half a formation master, so she could see Tian Jiqian was laying a formation. However, his method of laying a formation was different from those that required the assistance of formation discs, formation flags, and spirit stones. It was based on the changes of the 5 elements, yin and yang around him. He used his own spiritual aura to create restraints to achieve the effect of a formation. It could be called a formation, but it was actually invisible. It couldn't be called a formation, but it could indeed achieve the effect of a formation. Therefore, formation masters called it invisible formation. Invisible formations couldn't be compared to some big formations. They couldn't achieve the effect of controlling the enemy, but they were more flexible. As long as they had a formation plate, a formation master could lay a formation at any time to form restraints. Being able to lay an invisible formation was a sign of a formation master. Mo Tiange believed her formation skills weren't inferior to most formation masters, but she still couldn't lay an invisible formation. In the end, her focus was still on cultivation. Although she had a lot of knowledge about formations, compared to specialized formation masters, her formation techniques were still a bit inferior. This Tian Jiqian came from the Five Elements Valley and was already in the middle stage of the core formation realm. His fighting skills were very ordinary. It seemed all his skills were on formations. After realizing this, Imo Tiange realized Ling Yunhe wasn't careless in asking Tian Jiqian to go with them. With Tian Jiqian's invisible formation, even if Ling Yunfei was a bit inferior, the strength of the three of them together was not inferior to her, Tian Can, and Yang Qingji. In the end, the formation plate emitted a dazzling white light. Tian Jiqian shouted, "Go!" The moment he spoke, Imo Tiange sensed the spiritual aura in her surroundings stabilizing. An invisible defensive formation enveloped the six of them. Those cat demons suddenly fell as if they had run into an invisible wall. With one pounce, they were all sent flying. This way, Ling Yunhe raised the soul-restraining bead and pointed in a direction. The six of them didn't stop and flew away. Chapter 373. By the time they got rid of the leopard cats, the six of them were exhausted. With their core formation realm cultivations, they wouldn't be so tired. However, in this carefree valley, all kinds of breaths were mixed together. Although their cultivation levels didn't decrease, their strength was greatly suppressed. Imo Tiange looked at Tian Jiqian, whose forehead was covered in sweat, and asked Ling Yunhe, "Fellow Taoist Ling, is this place safe?" Ling Yunhe looked around and nodded. "It's okay. Let's rest for a while." Ling Yunfei and Tian Jiqian were both relieved. Ling Yunfei's cultivation level was the lowest, and Tian Jiqian had to maintain a formation, which consumed the most spiritual power. As soon as they heard they could rest, they almost collapsed. Tian Jiqian struggled to hold on and handed a formation plate to Ling Yunhe. "Brother Ling, please arrange this formation." Ling Yunhe nodded. "Brother Tian, just rest." He took the formation plate, skillfully arranged the formation, and called out to the other three people, "Fellow Taoists, rest too. I'll guard the formation." Imo Tiange and the other two people also felt tired, so they each found a place to rest inside the formation. Although they said they wanted to rest, they didn't completely relax. At least, Imo Tiange found vigilance in Yang Chengji and Tiansan's eyes. She smiled in her heart. This group of people was invited by Ling Yunhe to help. They agreed to help because Ling Yunhe had promised them certain conditions. However, it was also possible that they wanted to take the opportunity to enter Carefree Valley to find some spiritual treasures. She originally thought Ling Yunhe's two helpers were a bit weaker, so she wasn't so vigilant. Now that she realized Tian Jiqian had this kind of skill, she was naturally very afraid. Tian Jiqian and Ling Yunfei were Ling Yunhe's most reliable companions. Although Ling Yunhe had deliberately found three people with similar cultivation bases to them to form a balance and reassure everyone, they were not familiar with each other. Comparatively speaking, they were already at a disadvantage. Now that they had discovered that Tian Jiqian was not as weak as they had imagined, they naturally had to be even more careful. However, Imo Tiange pondered. Just now, Ling Yunhe asked Tian Jiqian to show his strength to intimidate them. After adjusting her breathing for a while, her spiritual aura was completely restored and her spirit was also much better. She stopped meditating and opened her eyes. She cultivated the art of the origin and also obtained Qin, she's pure yang aura. Now that she had a small origin inside her body, she could continuously replenish her spiritual aura, so her recovery time was shorter than theirs. "Fellow Taoist Qin." Ling Yunhe's voice rang out in his ears. Imo Tiange stopped and turned around. Upon seeing Ling Yunhe walking towards her and sitting down next to her, Imo Tiange smiled and said, "Is something the matter, fellow Taoist Ling?" Ling Yunhe also returned a smile. He looked at her, and there was a sense of evaluation in his gaze. Has fellow Taoist Qin's spiritual aura recovered? Imo Tiange nodded. So fast. Ling Yunhe stared at her for a long time. "Fellow Taoist, you really don't show your true colors." "Fellow Taoist Ling, please don't misunderstand," Imo Tiange said faintly. I just have a special cultivation technique that allows me to recover my spiritual aura faster. In terms of cultivation level, I'm not stronger than fellow Taoist. Is that so? Ling Yunhe didn't ask any more questions, but from his expression, he didn't seem to believe it. Mo Tiange didn't feel like explaining. She took the map of Carefree Valley and looked down at it carefully. After a while, Mo Tiange asked, "Fellow Taoist Ling, you said the Carefree tree doesn't grow in a fixed place. Carefree Valley is so big. How are we going to find it?" Ling Yunhe smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist Qin, could it be that you've forgotten the characteristics of my cultivation technique?" Mo Tiange was stunned. "Fellow Taoist, you mean your cultivation technique is very sensitive to the aura of spiritual treasures, so you're using it to search?" And Ling Yunhe nodded. "Since the carefree fruit is such a spiritual treasure, it'll definitely cause changes in the spiritual aura in the surroundings no matter where it is. As long as I'm within a certain range, I'll be able to sense it." "I see." No wonder he never told her how to search for treasures. After a while, Tiancan finished regulating his breath and opened his eyes. Ling Yunhe nodded at the two of them. "I'll also go rest. Fellow Taoists, please stay alert." Upon seeing the two of them nodding, Ling Yunhe turned around, found a corner, sat cross-legged, and regulated his breath. Mo Tiange and Tiancan didn't have anything to say. They just nodded at each other as a greeting and went their separate ways. At this time, Mo Tiange suddenly felt movement in her spiritual beast bag. She looked down and saw that it was the spiritual beast bag containing Fei Fei. The three spiritual beasts had all reached the 5th rank now. Xiaohua and Xiaofan were strong and could be of great help in times of crisis. As for Fei Fei, although it wasn't good at fights of magical powers, it had a special ability. Mo Tiange knew this trip wouldn't be easy, so she simply took all three of them with her. Could it be that something happened to Fei Fei? She quietly opened the spiritual beast bag, but didn't let Fei Fei out. Instead, she used her divine comprehension to communicate with it. "Fei Fei, what's the matter?" After a while, Fei Fei's voice rang in her mind. Since they had a spiritual beast contract, Fei Fei could speak, so it was very convenient to communicate with her divine comprehension. "Master, what's this place?" "The spiritual aura here is very strong." Mo Tiange said, "Of course. This is a paradise from the distant past era. Unfortunately, the world has changed, and this place has changed. No matter how strong the spiritual aura here is, it's useless now." "Oh, I found the spiritual aura here is a bit strange. There seems to be a lot of good things here." Mo Tiange was stunned. She suddenly remembered that in addition to calming its mind and coexisting peacefully with almost all demonic beasts, Fei Fei was also very sensitive to spiritual aura and could seek treasures. "What do you feel? Is there the aura of spiritual treasures?" Fei Fei was silent for a while, then said, "I'm not sure. I'm not very familiar with these things, so I can't be sure. Master, don't close the spiritual beast bag. Let me sense it for a while. I feel the spiritual aura here is very friendly." All right. Since Fei Fei signed a spiritual beast contract with her, it had been kept in the virtual sky world and rarely went out, so its perception of spiritual aura wasn't that strong. With this thought in mind, Mo Tiange agreed to its request. A moment later, Ling Yunhe and the others finished adjusting their breaths and stopped meditating. The group was ready to set off again. Mo Tiange felt the atmosphere in the group changed slightly. At the beginning, Tian Can and Yang Qingji were a little careless. Although they kept their promise and listened to Ling Yunhe, it was obvious that they did not take him seriously. However, at this moment, they were much more cautious. Whether it was because he was wary of Ling Yunhe's group of three, or because he had seen Tian Zhiqian's methods, he no longer underestimated him. In any case, Ling Yunhe's goal should have been achieved. The two of them were shocked. As for Mo Tiange, she wasn't too worried. She had 3 5th-rank spiritual beasts with her. Even if Fei Fei couldn't fight, it shouldn't be difficult for her to protect herself with Xiaofan and Xiaohua. "Fellow Taoist Ling," Tianqin suddenly said, "this carefree valley is so big. How are we going to find the carefree fruit you mentioned?" Mo Tinga had asked Ling Yunhe this question in private before. Now, Ling Yunhe answered, "Fellow Taoist Tianqian, don't worry. We're still in the outer valley. The carefree fruit only grows in the inner valley of Carefree Valley. We still have several tests to pass." "Is that so?" Tianqian looked around and said doubtfully, "The spiritual aura here is already shockingly rich. Moreover, we encountered those cat demons as soon as we entered the valley. If we still have several tests to pass, won't it be very dangerous?" Ling Yunhe paused for a while, then sighed and said, "If it wasn't dangerous, why would I pay such a big price to invite you to go with me? I might as well be frank. Each of your conditions isn't easy to fulfill. If it weren't for my nascent soul ancestor, even I wouldn't be able to get those spiritual treasures." Spiritual treasures. Mo Tinga's gaze swept between Tianqian and Yang Qingji. She wondered what kind of conditions they put forward that even an elder of a big sect like Ling Yunhe felt it was difficult to fulfill. Speaking of which, her conditions weren't easy to fulfill. The grudge between her and Han Shiji was fine. Presumably, with Ling Yunhe's identity, Han Shiji wouldn't refuse her request. However, it wasn't easy to get the complete art of Sinu. Cultivation techniques and spirit veins were the foundation of a sect. Spirit veins couldn't be stolen or lost, so all big sects put all their energy into preserving cultivation techniques. Every sect, even if it was only a small sect with 100 or so people, had a library that stored cultivation techniques. Not only was it protected by formations and restrictions, but it was also guarded by high-level cultivators. Even the sect's disciples had to go through layers of security when they entered. Furthermore, they couldn't read books that were above their realm. Mo Tinga agreed to Ling Yunhe's conditions because she couldn't think of a solution. However, she didn't have much hope that he would be able to obtain the art of Sinu. Thinking up to this point, she felt she was at a disadvantage. Neither of her conditions could be fulfilled in a short time. It could be said that if she followed Ling Yunhe into Carefree Valley, she wouldn't be able to ask for something like a deposit. If she was unlucky and Ling Yunhe couldn't leave Carefree Valley safely, she would be empty-handed and wouldn't be able to get anything. In the end, she was too inexperienced. She had never helped others before, so she simply didn't think about this matter. Otherwise, if she asked Ling Yunhe for some benefits first, he wouldn't refuse. However, Ling Yunhe continued, "Fellow Taoists, you don't have to worry too much. I said before that I'm more than 70% sure I can leave safely. I wasn't lying. Our GN sect seniors have long been here, so I've already prepared how to break through these barriers." Tianqian took a deep look at Ling Yunhe, then nodded. "I hope fellow Taoist Ling will keep his word." In a group of 6, Ling Yunhe and Mo Tinga walked in the front, Tian Jiqian and Ling Yunfei walked in the middle, and Tianqian and Yang Qingji stayed at the back. Tian Jiqian held his jade plate and observed the changes in the aura of the 5 elements around him from time to time. The sky in Carefree Valley was always gray. Mo Tinga raised her head and saw that the surrounding cliffs were towering, revealing only a small part of the sky. The air was filled with dust and fog visible to the naked eye, so everything in front of them was hazy. The 6 of them advanced silently. The chaotic aura surrounded them, so they had to constantly maintain spiritual aura protection to keep the filthy aura out. After a long time, Ling Yunhe finally stopped and said, "Everyone will enter the inner valley from here." Mo Tinga stuck her head out to take a look and was shocked. This was a narrow valley entrance that could only allow 2 people to walk side by side. At the entrance of the valley, there was a crack. It was dark and looked like a greedy mouth that was waiting to devour passers-by. Chapter 374. This is... Ling Yunfei was shocked when he saw the crack at the mouth of the valley. He looked at Ling Yunhe and asked, "Second brother, how do we get through this?" This crack was extremely wide and occupied the entire narrow entrance of the valley. Moreover, it looked very deep. At first glance, it seemed bottomless. Most importantly, the black aura inside was surging, and the smell of filth was especially strong. Mo Tinga looked up and saw cliffs on both sides of the mouth of the valley. The cliffs at the top were joined together, making the entire mouth of the valley look like an arch. It was really difficult to fly over. The filthy aura had a great effect on cultivators. The filthy aura that was emitted after the death of the lynx had already forced them to retreat. The filthy aura in this crack was more than 10 times denser than before. If they tried to fly over, they would probably consume too much spiritual aura and their strength would decrease. This was only the mouth of the valley. They didn't know where the fretless fruit was, so it was definitely unwise to take such a risk at this time. Ling Yunhe said, "With the soul-restraining bead, we can restrain the filth. However, we still have to take some risks to cross this crack. What do you think?" Tian Jiqian and Ling Yunfei didn't say anything. Yang Qingji snorted and said, "Fellow Taoist Ling, why do you ask so many questions? We're already here. What can we do if we don't agree?" Ling Yunhe smiled. "Sorry, I asked a meaningless question." He paused for a moment, then said, "I have a way, but it requires some risks." "Second brother, if you have a way, just say it." "We have to find a way to cross," Ling Yunfei said eagerly. Ling Yunhe glanced at him, but didn't say anything. He opened the spiritual beast pouch on his waist, and in an instant, a strange aura rushed over. "This is..." The other 5 people's expressions changed. They saw a black and shiny vulture flying out of Ling Yunhe's spiritual beast pouch. Judging from its aura, it was already in the 5th rank. Its eyes were fierce, and its claws were sharp. A vulture spirit beast wasn't a big deal, but this vulture was obviously not an ordinary spirit beast. Its body was filled with a heavy aura of death. "Fellow Taoists, this is a vulture I found in the Western Barbarians by accident." In the Western Barbarians, regardless of whether it was a mortal or a cultivator, they would be given a sky burial after death, and their corpses would be swallowed by vultures. This vulture might have eaten too many corpses and mutated. It's full of death aura, but it's still able to survive. Death aura. Mo Tiange had suffered greatly because of it before. Several dozen years ago, when she was still in the middle stage of the foundation building realm, she accidentally went to the northernmost area of the celestial pole and met Jiang Shanghong, who saved her in Yunwu sect. From there, she got to know a group of Zhengfa sect cultivators. That Zhengfa sect cultivator, Ren Yufeng, obtained a stone tablet from an ancient divine temple. Because of that, she cultivated a strange aura of death, which almost caused her to die in Lin Hai's Bishuan court. There were a lot of strange things about this matter because dead aura could only exist on dead people. Logically speaking, it was difficult for living people to escape death once they were contaminated with dead aura. She and several Bishuan court cultivators who were slightly contaminated with dead aura had to spend a very long time to get rid of it. She couldn't understand this matter. Later, when she brought that stone tablet back to Xianqing school, Lord Daoist Jinghe felt it was strange, so he asked for it to study. Later, she forgot to ask him about it. Now, she saw a vulture with dead aura all over its body. This vulture situation was different from Ren Yufeng's. When Ren Yufeng was covered in dead aura, he almost turned into a skeleton. He couldn't be considered a person at all. However, this vulture was living too well. Its fur was glossy and smooth, and it looked vigorous and strong. Regarding filthy aura, I once asked my group's nascent soul seniors for advice. This aura can corrode the body and slowly make living things lose their vitality. Dead aura is the same. Therefore, dead aura can also be considered a kind of filthy aura. Fellow Taoist Ling is right. Yang Qingji suddenly said, "We devil cultivators know more about these things than you do. Filthy aura isn't limited to dead aura, but we consider dead aura to be a kind of filthy aura." Tian Jiqian was puzzled. What does this have to do with the matter at hand? Brother Ling, do you want to let your spiritual beast fly over? But that still can't solve our problem. Yang Qingji cast a glance at him, then said, "I'm guessing fellow Taoist Ling wants us to hide in the dead aura to muddle our way through, right?" Ling Yunhe nodded and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist Yang is right. That's exactly what I mean. Second brother, this is very dangerous, isn't it?" Ling Yunfei looked at the vulture with a vigilant expression. We're trapped in dead aura. What's the difference between being surrounded by filthy aura and being surrounded by dead aura? The difference is that this is my spiritual beast. Ling Yunhe stroked the vulture's head. When he reached out his hand, the vulture didn't resist at all. It even opened its mouth and let out a cry, rubbing his hand as if it was acting like a spoiled child. Mo Tiange discovered that the vulture's dead aura seemed to have no effect on Ling Yunhe. When he reached out his hand, the dead aura automatically moved away. Was it because he was the vulture's master? Everyone, rest assured, I can control this dead aura at will and make it form a circle around us without harming us. As long as you're a bit more careful, you can pass through it easily. Ling Yunhe's voice trailed off, but no one responded. A middle-stage core formation cultivator with a 5th-rank spiritual beast could be considered a great help. In a fight of magical powers, the spiritual beast could suppress cultivators in the same realm as him. However, this spiritual beast also had a unique dead aura, so everyone couldn't help but be afraid. Mo Tiange finally realized that Ling Yunhe boldly invited the three of them because he had something to rely on. In terms of strength, Shi, Tian Can, and Yang Chengji were naturally stronger than Tian Jiqian and Ling Yunfei. However, with the help of Tian Jiqian's invisible formation and this dead aura spiritual beast, Ling Yunhe's strength was far beyond their imagination. Mo Tiange sighed inwardly. This Ling Yunhe was famous. He was one of the genius disciples of Juyan's sect, the #1 sect in Yunzhou. His status in the sect was so high that he shouldn't be inferior to Qin Shi's. How could a cultivator like him be weak? Tian Can and Yang Qingji naturally also thought of what she could think of, but they were more afraid of the method Ling Yunhe proposed. The spiritual beast belonged to Ling Yunhe alone. If they agreed, they would be surrounded by the dead aura. At that time, their lives would be in Ling Yunhe's hands. Cultivators cherished their lives. How could they put their lives in someone else's hands? Whether it was Mo Tiange, Tian Can, or Yang Chengji, none of them were willing. Tian Jiqian and Ling Yunfei didn't say anything. Tian Jiqian looked a bit hesitant. Ling Yunhe was his good friend, so he trusted him to a certain extent. However, this was an extraordinary matter, so he couldn't make a decision immediately. As for Ling Yunfei, he still looked a bit confused. He looked at Ling Yunhe, then looked at the others. The 6 of them were in a deadlock for a while. Ling Yunhe stared at them, patiently waiting for their answer. After a while, Tian Can spoke. His voice was sharp and his tone was even worse. Fellow Taoist Ling, why didn't you tell us about this before you left? Could it be that Your Excellency is waiting for us to enter Carefree Valley and have no choice but to agree? Ling Yunhe said calmly. If I told you, would fellow Taoist Tian Can agree to come? Of course not. Tian Can's tone was resolute. If that was the case, I wouldn't agree no matter what condition fellow Taoist Ling proposed. That's right, Ling Yunhe said faintly. I was indeed worried you wouldn't agree, so I didn't tell you beforehand. This matter is very important to me. Time is too tight. If any of you are unwilling to come, I'm afraid our trip to Carefree Valley will be in vain. Yang Chengji said coldly. We can also turn hostile now. Does fellow Taoist Ling think you can force us to participate? Facing Yang Chengji's fierce attitude, Ling Yunhe sighed and said, Fellow Taoist Yang, you're overthinking it. What I did wasn't honorable, but I didn't mean to offend you. Fellow Taoist Qin is fine, but fellow Taoist Yang, fellow Taoist Tian Can, I've already paid a spiritual treasure for your help. If I wasn't sincere, why would I do this? But you did this, everyone. Ling Yunhe interrupted Yang Chengji and said, The reason why I did this is because I hope you'll reconsider. If I told you beforehand, you most likely wouldn't consider it and would have decided to withdraw. In that case, time would be too tight, and it would be difficult for me to find more people. Now that we're already in Carefree Valley, it'll be difficult for us to go back. I hope you'll reconsider. I've already paid the price. Is it necessary to hurt you at this time? Still, no one spoke. What Ling Yunhe said wasn't unreasonable, but the three of them still looked unsightly. Taking risks was one thing, but being schemed against was another. They weren't afraid of risks. They were angry at being schemed against. It wasn't that Ling Yunhe couldn't be trusted, but core formation cultivators all had their own pride. Brother Ling Tianjiqian also sighed. If you told me beforehand, based on our many years of friendship, how could I not agree? Why did you hide it from me? Ling Yunhe was stunned. He turned to look at Tianjiqian and said apologetically, Brother Tian, I didn't mean to hide it from you. But I didn't mean to harm you. Of course I know that. Tianjiqian paused for a while and said, No matter what, I'll go in with you. Ling Yunhe smiled. I knew you, second brother. I don't need to say anything. Ling Yunfei said, I've always listened to you, and I'll do the same today. Ling Yunhe nodded, but he still turned to the three of them. He thought for a while and said, How about this? We're not in a hurry, so we can rest for half a day at the entrance of the valley. How about you use this time to think about it? As long as you continue to help me enter the inner valley, I'll give each of you a bottle of vital peace pills in addition to the conditions I promised before as repayment. Even if you don't agree, you can leave the valley on your own. I won't stop you, and I won't ask for the spiritual treasure I gave you before. Chapter 375. Vital Peace Pill. Emotinga didn't know what it was, but Yang Qingji's eyes lit up the moment he heard what Ling Yunhe said. Even Tianjiqian and Ling Yunfei looked towards Ling Yunhe. Ling Yunhe smiled and said nothing. Emotinga hesitated for a moment, then asked, Fellow Taoist Ling, what's an intrinsic peace pill? Ling Yunhe paused for a moment and said with a smile, Apologies, I forgot that fellow Taoist Qin isn't from Cloud Midst. I believe you also haven't heard of my Jian sect's Essence Peace Pill. This pill is one of the high-grade pills of my Jian sect. It can be used to break through bottlenecks. Of course, it's not guaranteed to be effective. I see. Ling Yunhe didn't say much, but based on the expressions of Yang Qingji and the others, it wasn't difficult for Mo Tiange to guess that this essential peace pill must be a very rare and precious medicinal pill, which was why it could make disciples from famous cultivation groups like Yang Qingji so envious. Ling Yunfei looked at her and explained with a smile, Fellow Taoist Qin, our Juyin sect's vital peace pill is a famous elixir in Yunzhou. Even us inner sect disciples find it hard to obtain it, much less outsiders. He looked at Ling Yunhe with a face full of envy. If it wasn't for the fact that my second brother is deeply favored by the patriarch, I'm afraid he would be like me, waiting for a few years to get a few. Really? Ling Yunfei was already a core formation cultivator, so he could be considered an elder in the Jian sect. However, he could only wait for a few pills. It seemed like these pills were indeed very precious. Ling Yunhe had really gone all out this time. A pill that can help one break through bottlenecks? Tiankin asked. He looked at Ling Yunhe and asked, Fellow Taoist Ling, is this true? That's right. Ling Yunhe raised his eyebrows. Taoist Tiankin has never heard of the vital peace pill. Tiankin said indifferently, I've always lived in seclusion in a desolate place and rarely go out. I'm not clear about the affairs of Eastern Tang. I see. Ling Yunhe pointed to an empty space at the side and said, Everyone, go and take a rest. There's no rush to make a decision. Seeing that Ling Yunhe had finished setting up the defensive array formation, the others hesitated for a moment before going back to rest. Mo Tiange noticed that the hostile atmosphere had become a lot more peaceful, so she cast a meaningful glance at Ling Yunhe. This person could not be underestimated. If one were to say that he was magnanimous, he would also play tricks. If one were to say that he was sinister, he would offer very generous terms. Just as Ling Yunhe had said, if he had explained everything clearly beforehand, there was an 80% chance that the group would have dispersed before they could even enter Carefree Valley. After all, to these people, no one was willing to put their lives in the hands of others, no matter how generous the conditions were. But now, they had all entered the Carefree Valley and were at the entrance of the inner valley. It would not be easy for them to leave, even if they wanted to. Thus, the conditions that they could accept were slightly more relaxed. And Ling Yunhe agreed to give out the origin peace pill at this time. After discovering that he had been hiding something, the others were originally very dissatisfied and might very well leave in a huff. However, after hearing his promise, they calmed down. Even if someone were to leave in the end, they probably wouldn't bear any grudges against him. Mo Tinga sighed inwardly. A magnanimous person was worth befriending, but it would be difficult for him to gain a foothold in the immortal cultivation world. A clever person could mingle with wind and water, but people would respect him from afar. And this Ling Yunhe seemed to be in between the two, making people unable to be angry or happy. However, it was undeniable that if a person like him could really become the head of Jian's sect, he would probably have a very good life. Fellow Taoist Qin. A person was sitting cross-legged in the corner, thinking about her own matters, when she suddenly heard an ear-piercing voice. Mo Tinga turned her head and found that it was Tiancan. Aside from the fight they had before, she had no contact with Tiancan during this trip. She didn't know why Tiancan was talking to her now. Fellow Taoist Tiancan, what's the matter? Tiancan looked around and sat down not far from her. With a wave of his hand, he laid a soundproof barrier and said faintly, "What do you think about this?" Mo Tinga was stunned. Fellow Taoist Tiancan, are you asking me what I plan to do? Yes. Tiancan nodded and looked at her with his only exposed eyes. Ling Yunhe is indeed cunning, but he's also sincere. Since he has agreed to those conditions, we should be safe before he obtains the fretless fruit. However, it's hard to say whether he'll turn against us or not. Mo Tinga didn't speak for a long time. Tiancan couldn't help but ask, "Fellow Taoist Qin, what do you think?" Mo Tinga thought, they don't seem to be familiar with each other, right? These words seem to be too sincere. But he seems to be seriously discussing with me, so it seems a bit unreasonable to say that. She thought for a while and said, "What about fellow Taoist Tiancan? What's your decision?" Tiancan said, "I just can't decide. To tell you the truth, the thing Ling Yunhe promised me is very important to me. If I have it, my future cultivation path will be much smoother. It could be said that taking a certain amount of risk for this item was worth it." But he paused and glanced at the others. Ling Yunhe was sitting cross-legged in the middle of the formation, adjusting his breath with his eyes closed. His spiritual beast, the vulture, was perched on his shoulder, staring ahead fiercely and glancing at the others from time to time. Ling Yunfei and Tian Jiqian seemed to be chatting. Tiancan laid a soundproof barrier around them, so they couldn't hear each other. As for Yang Qingji, he was leaning against the mountain wall with his arms crossed. He seemed to be thinking about something. "There must be something wrong," Tiancan said. "Fellow Taoist Qin, please take a look. The three of us invited by Ling Yunhe aren't mediocre. On the contrary, Tian Jiqian and Ling Yunfei are far weaker than us. Tian Jiqian is a formation master, but what about Ling Yunfei? Could it be that Ling Yunhe, as a candidate for the head of Jian's sect, has a good relationship with many people and can't find a stronger companion? Even if the Ling clan doesn't have one, Jian's sect must have one, right?" Mo Tinga said. He said this matter involves the interests of various cultivation groups in the sect and disputes between clans, so it's not good to invite martial brothers who have a good relationship with us. Humph. Tiancan showed a hint of mockery in his eyes. "Is that true?" "Yin Zhong isn't." He paused halfway through his sentence before continuing. "The number one sect in Yunzhong lives up to its name. They have more than 10 nascent soul cultivators and more than 100 core formation cultivators. How could they not be able to find a decent helper?" From what Ling Yunfei said, Ling Yunhe is very favored by the nascent soul ancestor of the Ling clan. For the sake of his beloved grandson and the benefit of the alliance, even if he doesn't care, other people won't care, right? Mo Tinga lowered her gaze and kept smiling. Her expression didn't change at all. Tiancan blinked and continued to ask, "Fellow Taoist Qin, can you at least tell me something?" Mo Tinga looked up and asked, "What is it? What do you think about this matter?" Mo Tinga sighed and said, "I want to know who you are, fellow Taoist Tiancan." Tiancan was stunned and his eyes became fierce. "What do you mean, fellow Taoist Qin?" Mo, Tinga said faintly. First of all, aren't you afraid that I have a friendship with Ling Yunhe and will pretend not to know him, so I can pin down other people? Tiankin narrowed his eyes and stared at her without saying anything. Mo, Tinga continued. Second, even if you're sure I have nothing to do with Ling Yunhe and we don't have any friendship, you shouldn't say these things to a stranger, right? Tiansan's hands were clenched. Finally, what's the point of saying these things to me, fellow Taoist Tiankin? Do you think you'll believe whatever I say? After listening to her, Tiankin stared at her without moving or saying anything for a long time. Mo Tinga just smiled. In other people's eyes, they were just chatting and didn't have any dispute. After a while, Tiankin finally let go of her. He looked at Mo Tinga and said calmly, "Now isn't the time to tell you who I am. Just like fellow Taoist Qin, you also concealed your background. However, I can be frank with you. I said these things to you because I want to find a temporary companion. It's better than taking risks alone." Mo Tinga raised her eyebrows and asked with a smile, "Why me? Fellow Taoist Yang is also good. Although he's only in the early stage of the core formation realm, his strength doesn't seem inferior to ours." Tiankin shook his head, stared at his hands, and said faintly, "Fellow Taoist Yang is a devil path cultivator and the disciple of one of the 3 devil monarchs. I don't want to have any entanglement with him. Besides, fellow Taoist Qin's strength surpasses ordinary middle-stage core formation cultivators. She's stronger than fellow Taoist Yang. But I'm a female cultivator." Mo Tinga looked at him with a smile. "Generally speaking, even if there's a gap between the middle stage and the early stage, I'd still think it's safer to choose a male cultivator, right?" Of course, she didn't think she was weaker than male cultivators. However, it was a common phenomenon in the cultivation world to value men over women. Even if the cultivation level of male cultivators was slightly lower, they'd still think male cultivators were more reliable because male cultivators were more decisive in handling matters. In a life-or-death situation, male cultivators could perform better. Upon hearing her question, Tiankin glared at her angrily. "So what if she's a female cultivator? Is fellow Taoist Qin also someone who belittles himself?" Mo Tinga was a little surprised by his anger, but she didn't get angry. She just shook her head and reminded him, "Fellow Taoist Tiankin, if your behavior is suspicious, I won't dare to form an alliance with you." Tiankin was stunned by her words, but he slowly calmed down. When he completely calmed down, Tiankin said, "On our way here, I've observed fellow Taoist Qin's behavior. She's no worse than male cultivators. Fellow Taoist Yang, on the other hand, has an extraordinary identity, so I don't want to have anything to do with him. There are 6 of us in total, and those 3 are in the same group. That being the case, I don't have any other choice." Mo Tinga nodded, accepting his explanation. She thought for a while, then said, "Fellow Taoist Tiankin, does that mean you're going to agree to Ling Yunhe's offer and continue taking risks?" Tiankin nodded. "Yes, I have to say Ling Yunhe's very powerful. Since we're already here, even if he wants us to leave on our own, we still have to consider whether we can leave safely or not. On second thought, he offered us such a generous reward, which is very tempting. Moreover, he has no reason to harm us at this time, so it's worth a gamble. But there's a risk after this, right?" Mo Tinga continued. "According to fellow Taoist's inference, after we find the carefree fruit, they might turn hostile." "Exactly. This is the reason why I want to form an alliance with fellow Taoist Qin." Tiankin stared at Ling Yunhe, who was still meditating, with deep fear in his eyes. Chapter 376. It was impossible for the other 4 to not know that the 2 of them had set up a soundproofing barrier, but they all turned a blind eye to it. It was normal for a group of unfamiliar people to take risks together. Everyone had a tacit understanding. Mo Tinga, on the other hand, was tapping the heaven and earth fan in her hand again and again. She seemed to be contemplating and didn't answer. Tiankin seemed to be a little impatient with her knocking. He couldn't help but ask, "Fellow Taoist Qin, do you need to think for so long?" Mo Tiange raised her head and smiled at him. It's a matter of life and death, so I naturally have to consider it carefully. For the last time, the heaven and earth fan knocked on the palm of her hand, and she clenched it tightly. All right, if an accident really happens, as long as fellow Taoist Tian can abide by the agreement at this moment, I will stand on the same side as you. After a pause, she raised her eyebrows and emphasized, however, fellow Taoist Tian, the premise of all of this is that Ling Yunhe doesn't keep his promise. We're only here to protect ourselves. If fellow Taoist has other motives, don't blame me for not lending a helping hand. Tian was stunned. He looked at her deeply and nodded. Of course. After a while, Ling Yunhe finally opened his eyes. He looked at Yang Qingji with a smile, then turned towards Mo Tiange and Tian. Fellow Taoists, have you decided? At that moment, Yang Qingji was still lost in thought. Tian and Mo Tiange had already removed the soundproof barrier and were meditating with their eyes closed. Yang Qingji was the first to come back to his senses. Looking at the vulture on his shoulder, he said, I want to see the origin peace pill first. Ling Yunhe nodded. Of course. He then turned towards Mo Tiange and Tian. What about fellow Taoists? Tian was the first to say, that's true. Ling Yunhe looked at Mo Tiange. Upon seeing her calm expression, he smiled and said, it seems fellow Taoist Qin also agreed. Mo Tiange sighed helplessly. She didn't like Ling Yunhe's smile right now. This person was frank and cunning, but cunning and kind at the same time. He always looked like he had everything under control. When he smiled like this, there was an 80% chance that things were going as he wished. However, she extended a finger and shook it at Ling Yunhe. Fellow Taoist Ling, there are some things that we need to make clear first. The conditions that you promised before can only be fulfilled after the fact. If you fall out with me afterwards, I won't be able to reason with you. As for the other two fellow Taoists, they seem to have received a portion of the rewards that they had set. That's easy. Without hesitation, Ling Yun took something out of his chinquan bag and tossed it to Mo Tiange. With this, Juyin sect must do something for fellow Taoist, no matter how difficult it is. Before I complete this task for a fellow Taoist Qin, I will leave this item in your care for the time being. Mo Tiange took the toy. This was an ordinary-looking wooden plaque that was no more than 2 inches in length and width. There were no decorative patterns on it, only a faint spiritual light. Based on Mo Tiange's experience, this should be a special talisman. Moreover, it was the kind that was passed on secretly. Its aura was very ancient, and it must have been passed down for at least several thousand years. Returning Kindness Medallion. Once Ling Yunfei saw this object, his expression immediately changed. He stared fixedly at the wooden tablet in Mo Tiange's hand. Mo Tiange was astonished. She cast a glance at Ling Yunfei, then waved the wooden tablet at Ling Yunhe. Does this have any special significance? After his astonishment, Ling Yunfei's expression quickly returned to normal. He said to Mo Tiange solemnly, this is our Juyin sect's returning kindness medallion. The holder of this object is our Juyin sect's guest elder. With this object in hand, our Juyin sect's disciples are not allowed to harm a single hair on their head. Moreover, they can request Juyin sect to do one thing for them. As long as it doesn't harm the sect's interests, they must complete it no matter how difficult it is. He looked at Ling Yunhe with a complicated expression. In our entire Juyin sect, there are only 3 pieces of this object. I didn't expect one of them to be in second brother's hands. Returning kindness medallion? Mo Tiange narrowed her eyes. Speaking of which, this seemed like the behavior of a chivalrous man in the secular world who kept his word. Did such things also exist in the cultivation world? Although they usually paid attention to their promises, it was normal for them to fall out at any time if it involved important interests. Tian stared at the wooden tablet with a doubtful gaze. With this object in hand, will your Juyin sect really not move a finger and even do its best to complete the task? That's right. Ling Yunfei was once again a chatterbox. He spoke with fervor and assurance. In Yunzhong, our Juyin sect is the cultivation group that values the sect's inheritance and brotherhood the most. Our Grandmaster's 9 disciples all have deep brotherhood and advance and retreat together. That's why we're called Jiyin sect. This returning kindness medallion was left behind by our 9 Grandmasters. Back then, our Grandmaster received a great favor from someone, so he gifted this object to that person. He promised that with this returning kindness medallion, he would be able to move around Jiyin sect unimpeded and become a guest elder until he fulfilled his promise. After several thousand years, these 3 returning kindness medallions returned to the sect one after another and never appeared in the world again. Mo Tiange waved the ordinary-looking wooden tablet in her hand and said to Ling Yunhe, "In that case, this object must be very valuable. It's far more than valuable." The one who answered her was still Ling Yunfei. "With our Jiyin sect strength, if this object is leaked, it might even tempt nascent soul cultivators." A guest elder enjoyed all the benefits of an elder. They could use the sect's resources and weren't bound by the sect's restrictions. For some cultivators, this was indeed an excellent position. Once Ling Yunfei finished speaking, Mo Tiange turned her head to look. Tianji Qian and Yang Qingji's eyes flashed with fervor as they stared at the object. It seemed like they really wanted to snatch it back. As a result, Mo Tiange was confused. Not to mention that Ling Yunhe wasn't the sect head of Jiyin sect. Even if he was, such a valuable object would most likely be safeguarded by a nascent soul elder in the sect, right? He actually had one in his hands. Besides, he just casually threw this kind of object to someone else. Mo Tiange felt like her brain wasn't enough to process it. What was this Ling Yunhe thinking? As a cultivator, they had to be on guard at all times against being schemed against by others. Similarly, they had to avoid owing others too much. Owing others had 2 aspects. First, it was easy to develop inner demons. Second, it was easier to be schemed against by others. No matter which one it was, encountering it would be bad luck. Ling Yunhe was calm and composed. After Ling Yunfei roughly finished speaking, he said, "Since you have this object, does fellow Taoist Qin still have any doubts?" Mo Tiange looked at the wooden tablet, then her gaze swept over Ling Yunhe and Ling Yunfei. She then asked, "Even if I have this object in my hands, what if you snatch it back later?" Anger appeared on Ling Yunfei's face. He rushed to say, "That's impossible. This is the Patriarch's will. Disciples of Jiyin sect never do this kind of thing." Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Although it was normal for cultivators to be two-faced, they also had their own taboos. When it came to matters related to the Patriarch, they rarely disobeyed. Mo Tiange muttered to herself for a moment, then put the wooden tablet into her robe. She originally thought she suffered a big loss because she didn't ask for the reward beforehand. She never expected that she would be the one who benefited the most from this. If things were really as Ling Yunfei said, then even if Ling Yunhe failed this trip and died here, she wouldn't suffer a loss. Seeing that she put the object away, Ling Yunhe heaved a sigh of relief. However, Tianji Qian, Yang Qingji, and the others stared at Mo Tiange for a long time before they withdrew their gazes, looking very unwilling. Mo Tiange sighed inwardly. This Ling Yunhe is scheming again. Although this object was good, it was very troublesome. There were so many people here. Even if Ling Yunhe kept his promise, what if other people had evil intentions? Doing this seemed to give her a big advantage, but on the other hand, it was easy to put her on the fire. With so many people watching her obtain the return token and Ling Yunfei mentioning the special meaning of this object, she couldn't cooperate with others anymore. Because with such a precious treasure in hand, it would be easy to divide the spoils unevenly. In that case, no one could trust each other, and cooperation would be impossible. Therefore, she could only stand on Ling Yunhe's side. But if she refused the return token now, this problem couldn't be solved. With benefits in front of her, she actually wasn't moved at all. What would Ling Yunhe think of her? The others would certainly be vigilant against her. They were now companions, so it wasn't good to be too vigilant. At this thought, she glanced at Tianqian. Tiankin stared at the entrance of the valley calmly, as if he wasn't interested in everything in front of him. Noticing that Mo Tiange was looking at him, he turned his head and nodded slightly. Mo Tiange understood what he meant. Everything would go on as they had agreed just now. This made her feel a little conflicted. She had reached an agreement with Tiankin, but Ling Yunhe made this move again. What if he really fell out with her after this? After pondering for a while, she couldn't help but shake her head and smile, self-mockingly. She was getting more and more stupid. Ling Yunhe probably hoped that she wouldn't help others to rob his object, and Tiankin wanted to protect himself. These two didn't contradict each other. If Ling Yunhe kept his promise, she would certainly help him to the end. But if Ling Yunhe fell out with her after this, she could only cooperate with Tiankin to protect herself. Okay, since fellow Taoists have no objections, let's start now. We don't have much time. Ling Yunhe turned his hand, and 3 jade bottles appeared in his palm. He threw them one by one to them. These are primordial dawn. There are 3 pills in each bottle. Fellow Taoists, please check them. 3 pills? Tiankin repeated in a low voice. Ling Yunhe was still smiling, but his eyelids twitched. Fellow Taoist Tiankin, don't think these 3 pills are easy. Our Juyin sect can only concoct 1 or 2 furnaces a year. Plus, we have so many core formation cultivators, so we can only concoct 3 pills every few years. Mo Tiange pulled out the bottle stopper, poured out a fragrant, snow-white medicinal pill, dipped it in some powder, then brought it to her nose and sniffed it. The ingredients of the medicinal pill were very clean, and the temperature was just right. She could tell that the level of the concocting master who concocted this medicinal pill was very high. At least, he wasn't inferior to her. Juyin sect was Juyin sect, the #1 cultivation group in Yunzhou. The level of their concocting master was also very high. The other 2 people were also checking the medicinal pill. Tiankin only examined it a little. Seeing that Mo Tiange didn't have any abnormal expression when she poured the medicinal pill back, he put his portion into his Chinquan bag. Yang Xingji was a bit more careful. He held a jade cup in his hand and poured the medicinal pill into it. He seemed to be studying something. Could it be that there were some restrictions on devil cultivators taking medicinal pills made by Dao cultivators? A few random thoughts flashed through her mind. Mo Tiange muttered to herself for a while, then put the bottle of primordial dawn away. It wasn't that she didn't have this kind of medicinal pill that could help her break through bottlenecks. However, since this was a spiritual pill that Juyin sect didn't teach to outsiders, it must have some extraordinary properties. There was no harm in putting it away. When Yang Qingji also put away the medicinal pill and turned his attention back to her, Ling Yunhe smiled. He patted Vulture on his shoulder and said, "We don't have much time. Let's go." Chapter 377. When they were surrounded by the dead aura, everyone unconsciously released their auras. Although they all agreed to Ling Yunhe's suggestion, as core formation cultivators, self-protection had become a kind of instinct. Although their self-protection methods were mostly useless in this situation, time passed quickly and slowly. This period of time passed both fast and slow at the same time. Aside from Ling Yunhe, the others all had grave expressions on their faces and were ready to attack. Mo Tiange had no doubt that if anything went wrong, they would immediately use their strongest killing moves to kill Ling Yunhe. Fortunately, that didn't happen. When their feet touched the ground, they all heaved sighs of relief. Then, the dead aura surrounding them gradually dispersed and disappeared without a trace. Ling Yunhe stroked the vulture on his shoulder, took out a medicinal pill, and fed it to comfort it. The vulture swallowed the medicinal pill, let out a satisfied cry, and stopped on his shoulder. Mo Tiange breathed a sigh of relief and glanced at Ling Yunhe. Ling Yunhe smiled and said loudly, "I'm a man of my word. Do you believe me now?" Just now, everyone was surrounded by the dead aura, and the vulture that produced the dead aura only listened to Ling Yunhe's orders. It could be said that everyone's lives were in his hands. Yang Qingji was the first to recover. He snorted and said coldly, I don't dare to gamble on the way back. Ling Yunhe hadn't obtained the fretless fruit yet and needed their help, so the possibility of him taking action was very low. When they returned, not to mention Yang Qingji, even Imo Tiange, who had the token of repayment, wouldn't dare to gamble. With this thought in mind, Imo Tiange turned to look at the dark crack at the entrance of the valley with a solemn expression. If she didn't use Ling Yunhe's method, she would have to consume a lot of spiritual aura to cross the crack, and she also had to be careful of other people's ambushes. After thinking for a long time, she sighed. This trip was more dangerous than she imagined. Carefree Valley was indeed a dangerous place, but more importantly, the people who came with them were all difficult to deal with and had evil intentions. If you don't trust me on the way back, you can leave, Ling Yunhe said faintly. I'll leave the valley as soon as I get the fretless fruit. Once he finished speaking, Yang Chengji let out a humph and turned his head away, ignoring him. Tiancan, on the other hand, glanced at Imo Tiange, but didn't say anything. Ling Yunhe didn't waste any more words. He scanned the surroundings and said, Everyone, this is the inner valley of the Carefree Valley, and it's even more dangerous than the outer valley. If we don't unite, it's very likely that we'll be annihilated here. Thus, I hope that no matter what goals you have in your hearts, before we leave the valley, everyone should work together. Is there a need for fellow Taoist Ling to say that? Tiancan said coldly. For the sake of our own lives, we have to listen to him obediently. Hearing this, Ling Yunhe only smiled slightly, not offended. The group of 6 continued on their way. Imo Tiange raised her head and looked around. The inner valley of Carefree Valley was much narrower than the outer valley. It was surrounded by cliffs and had a complicated terrain. The aura here was even more strange. Sometimes it was rich spiritual aura, sometimes it was concentrated devil aura, and sometimes it was pure filthy aura. They were not mixed together. Instead, they were separated and crisscrossed. This caused the surrounding scenery to change step by step. Places with rich spiritual aura had rare spiritual flowers and herbs. Places with concentrated devil aura had objects of the devil path, and places with filthy aura were full of destructive aura. This was actually a good thing for the 6 of them. They just needed to observe more to avoid the filthy aura. Moreover, they also found many spiritual objects that were rarely seen in the outside world along the way. After a long time, Ling Yunfei became a bit impatient. He turned around and asked Ling Yunhe, Second brother, don't you feel it? Ling Yunhe shook his head and stared at him with a slightly reproachful gaze. How long has it been? Why are you so impatient? Ling Yunfei scratched his head and said, I'm anxious. Tian Zhiqian laughed. You can't be anxious. Yunfei, you have to learn more from your second brother. We're cultivators. How can we be impatient? I know, Ling Yunfei answered helplessly. Then he muttered unwillingly, I know I can't compare with second brother, but I don't have to say it every day. Hearing this, Imo Tiange was speechless. Ling Yunfei didn't look much younger than Ling Yunhe, but his temperament was much more childish. As for Ling Yunhe, he naturally heard it too. He glanced at Imo Tiange helplessly, but didn't say anything. Imo Tiange thought he must love this brother very much. He loved him so much that he blamed him so much. Master, there's danger. Fei Fei's voice suddenly rang in her mind. Imo Tiange paused and secretly looked at the spiritual beast pouch. What's wrong? What do you feel? There's a dangerous aura. Fei Fei shouted. It's coming. As soon as he finished speaking, the jade plate in Tian Zhiqian's hand began to spin crazily. At the same time, Imo Tiange felt a strange aura coming from afar. There's something, Ling Yunhe shouted. Everyone be careful. As soon as he finished speaking, that thing was already in front of them. Messy auras assaulted their faces. There was spiritual aura, devil aura, and filthy aura. Imo Tiange looked up and saw a huge shadow vaguely flashing between the rocks and giant trees. That shadow approached them quickly and appeared in front of them in just a moment. Seeing the thing in front of them, the 6 people were shocked and sucked in a breath of cold air. The monster in front of them had a dark brown body and long arms. It looked like a human, but not a human. It was obviously an ape. However, this ape was as tall as 10 people and had 3 heads and 6 arms. It looked like a freak. "What's this?" Tian Jiqian cried out involuntarily. "Monster," Ling Yunhe murmured. He stared at the 3-headed ape without blinking and clenched the crescent moon jade knife in his hand. Mo Tinga turned her hand, and the heaven and earth fan appeared in her palm. The 3-headed ape was called a monster not because it had 3 heads and a strange appearance. There were so many strange phenomena in the cultivation world, so the 3-headed ape was nothing. The unusual thing about the thing in front of them was that the aura all over its body was mixed with spiritual aura, devil aura, and filthy aura. If a person had spiritual aura, he was an immortal cultivator. If he had devil aura all over his body, he was a devil cultivator. Even if he cultivated dead aura or filthy aura, he could only be considered an unorthodox cultivator. But if there was a person with so many auras mixed into one, he could only be considered a monster. There was no cultivation technique in the cultivation world that could accommodate so many auras. The same was true for beasts. Ordinary demonic beasts and cultivators absorbed spiritual aura. Demonic beasts in the devil domain could absorb devil aura. But under normal circumstances, there was absolutely no demonic beast that could absorb all kinds of aura and coexist with its body. This broke the hidden rules of the cultivation world, so it was definitely not a normal thing. The first one to react was Yang Qingji. His eyes were cold. He unfolded the ghost face banner in his hand, and devil aura surged. He stared at the giant ape in front of him and said coldly, "What are you waiting for? The one who strikes first has the advantage." He unfolded the ghost face banner, and devil aura rushed towards the giant ape. The others seemed to have woken up from a dream. No matter what kind of strange thing this 3-headed ape was, it was obvious that it was hostile to them. Ling Yunhe also quickly moved the crescent moon jade knife in his hand. He hid behind the ghost face banner and pounced on the giant ape. The giant ape didn't dodge. It blinked its huge, bell-like eyes as if it couldn't figure out what was flying towards it. However, what happened in the next moment made the 6 people's expressions change greatly. The devil aura from the ghost face banner and the crescent moon jade knife arrived at the giant ape's position one after the other and then stopped. The giant ape blinked and reached out its hand to touch the devil aura from the ghost face banner. The devil aura surged as if it wanted to swallow its finger, but in the next moment, the devil aura slowly dissipated between its fingers. Yang Qingji was shocked. He suddenly waved the ghost face banner in his hand, wanting to withdraw the devil aura, but the devil aura went out of control. The devil aura surged between him and the giant ape for a while before it slowly flowed towards the giant ape. In the end, it disappeared without a trace, as if it had never been there. Pooh! Yang Qingji suddenly vomited a mouthful of blood. As the devil aura dissipated, his face gradually appeared under the cloak. It was a pale and thin teenager. Mo Tinga was a bit flabbergasted. Although Yang Qingji hadn't shown his face, the sharpness in his eyes and his smooth hands indicated that he wasn't very old. However, Mo Tinga still didn't expect him to be a thin and weak teenager who didn't look like a devil cultivator at all. Soon after, Ling Yunhe's crescent moon jade knife stopped the moment it touched the giant ape. The 6 people's hearts instantly jumped. Yang Qingji's ghost face banner didn't hit the giant ape and instead suffered a backlash. If Ling Yunhe's attack also didn't work, it would be troublesome. If that happened, the other people's attacks would most likely be ineffective. Unfortunately, what they hoped wouldn't happen eventually happened. The giant ape raised its hand and touched it lightly. The crescent moon jade knife seemed to lose control and fell diagonally. Cough! Ling Yunhe also vomited a mouthful of blood. Whether it was his crescent moon jade knife or Yang Qingji's ghost face banner, both were their natal magic weapons. If their natal magic weapons were damaged, they would suffer a backlash on the cultivator's body. Seeing this, the other 4 people's faces instantly turned pale. Ling Yunhe and Yang Qingji weren't weak among them, but they were restrained by one move and even suffer backlash. Facing this giant ape, what should they do? After knocking down Ling Yunhe's jade knife, the giant ape took a step forward with curiosity in its eyes. Tian Jiqian clenched his teeth and made a hand seal. The jade plate in his hand spun crazily again. "Everyone," he shouted, "protect me while I set up the formation." Ling Yunfei immediately stood in front of him. Mo Tiange knocked the heaven and earth fan in her hand and rushed forward with Tiancan. Fellow Taoist Qinwei. Tiancan clenched the claws in his hand and shouted while pouncing on the giant ape. "You attract its attention, and I'll wait for an opportunity to kill it." Mo Tiange nodded and unfolded the heaven and earth fan. With a crane cry, the red-crowned crane flew out of the fan and pounced on the giant ape. The next moment, Mo Tiange's expression changed. Before the red-crowned crane touched the giant ape, its figure gradually faded and finally disappeared. She didn't have time to think. The heaven and earth fan pressed down, and the mountains and rivers rushed out and pressed down on the giant ape. This time, nothing unexpected happened. Under the confused gaze of the giant ape, layers of mountains and rivers flashed and trapped the giant ape. The giant ape stretched out one hand and scratched one of its heads as if it didn't know what was happening in front of it. At this moment, Tiancan shouted and pounced on the giant ape with the claws in his hand. The miracle didn't happen. The moment Tiansan's claws touched the giant ape, it was caught by one of the ape's hands. The ape blinked and waved its hand gently, throwing Tiancan away. Mo Tiange's face turned blue. The giant ape could actually throw Tiancan away, which meant it wasn't trapped by her heaven and earth fan at all. What on earth was this thing? Spiritual aura and devil aura were useless to it. Even her heaven and earth fan couldn't trap it. It had 3 heads and 6 arms, so it couldn't even launch a sneak attack. "Fellow Taoists, come back." Ling Yunhe's voice came from behind. Mo Tiange didn't have time to think. She waved the heaven and earth fan to stop the giant ape and returned to the formation with Tiancan. During the short time they had, Tian Jiqian had finished setting up the formation. He looked at the jade plate in his hand nervously, then looked up at the giant ape in front of him and said, "Fellow Taoists, please think of a way. My formation can only block it for a while." Chapter 378. Solution? What solution could they have? Except for Tian Jiqian, the other 5 people's expressions changed, but none of them spoke. Ling Yunhe and Yang Qingji were the first to feel the strangeness of this 3-headed ape. In fact, this 3-headed ape's aura was only at the 7th rank, not even at the 8th rank of the nascent soul stage. However, no matter if it was spiritual energy or demonic energy, it was unable to cause any damage to this giant ape. It was just like how people said it was invulnerable. After a brief silence, Tian Jiqian shouted again, "Hurry up, I can't hold it for long." At this time, the 3 giant apes were already approaching the 6 of them, and one of their arms stretched out towards them. Fortunately, they had Tian Jiqian's formation, and with a buzz, a thin layer of spirit chi barrier appeared around the 6 of them, blocking the arm. The giant ape blinked as if it didn't understand what was going on. Then, except for the 2 arms on its back, it swung its other 4 arms at them. Boom! The spiritual aura shield collided with the arm, creating a heavy sound. Following this loud noise, Tian Jiqian's face turned pale. He shouted, "No, it's too powerful. I can only hold it for 5 more times." Ling Yunhe asked anxiously, "Brother Tian, isn't your protective formation able to withstand several attacks from nascent soul cultivators? Why is it this time?" After another attack, Tian Jiqian said while gasping for breath, "That being said, this monster's power is strange. It can't be measured by common sense. What should we do?" Ling Yunhe asked the others as he didn't have time to ask for details. The people present were usually very opinionated, but this time, Ling Yunhe couldn't get any ideas. Yang Qingji's ghost face banner was used, but it didn't work. Ling Yunhe's crescent moon jade knife was still outside. Mo Tiange's heaven and earth fan couldn't trap it. Tiancan was a martial cultivator, but he was unexpectedly thrown out. Among the people present, except for Tian Jiqian who maintained the formation, Ling Yunfei was the only one who hadn't done anything. His dual flying swords didn't seem special, so the others couldn't do anything. Presumably, he was the same. The 6 of them could be considered the best among core formation cultivators, but they were helpless against this monster in front of them. Boom! Another attack. Everyone's faces turned pale. Ling Yunfei hesitantly asked, "What is this thing?" Spiritual qi, devil qi, and sharp weapons are all unable to attack it. Could it be that they are unable to harm it at all? Ling Yunha's expression was solemn as he added, "Even the illusory array can't trap it." Fellow Taoist Qin, am I right? Mo Tiange was dumbfounded. She didn't expect Ling Yunha would notice this at such a critical moment. She nodded. "That's right. My magic weapon can create an illusory formation, but this monster isn't affected." When the others heard this, their expressions turned ugly. Be it immortal cultivators or devil cultivators, there were only a few ways to attack. The first was spiritual qi and devil qi. The second was a sharp weapon attack that relied on magic treasures, and the third was a deceitful attack like an array formation. Ling Yunha's and Yang Qingji's attacks proved that the first method was useless. Tiancan proved the second method. If Mo Tiange approved the third method, they would really be helpless against this giant ape. Boom! The spiritual energy shield around the 6 of them trembled, and its glow dimmed significantly. Tian Jiqian's expression was strained, and beads of sweat rolled down his face. This was already the 3rd time. His protective barrier could only last 2 more times. Scatter! Ling Yunha made a decision the next moment. He glanced at the others and said hurriedly, "I'll lure this monster away. You guys go back to the entrance of the valley. If I'm fine, I'll come back to look for you." Second brother. Ling Yunfei was shocked. "Then you..." The others were also surprised. With this giant ape's ability, if he lured it away by himself, it would probably be a disaster. Did Ling Yunha want to sacrifice himself to protect the others? Boom! The 4th time. Ling Yunha didn't have time to explain. He just said hurriedly, "Yunfei, protect Brother Tian." Boom! The 5th time, the spiritual energy shield collided with the giant ape's arm, emitting a dazzling white light. Then the shield trembled. After holding on for several seconds, it finally broke and disappeared without a trace. At this moment, Ling Yunha stretched out his right hand, and the crescent moon jade knife on the ground flew back into his hand. He swung it, and the jade knife flew towards the giant ape with a sharp spiritual aura. With a chi sound, the jade knife cut through the aura around the giant ape. Soon after, the giant ape raised its arm, and the jade knife stopped in front of its arm. Ling Yunha clenched his teeth and made a hand seal, injecting spiritual aura into the jade knife. The jade knife flew forward half an inch and touched the giant ape's knuckles. Woo! The giant ape let out a long howl and swung its arm, once again throwing the jade knife. Pooh! Ling Yunha spat out a mouthful of blood, but this time he didn't have time to adjust his breath. He grabbed some medicinal pills from his robe and stuffed them into his mouth. Then he dashed away. At the same time, the jade knife flew back into his hand. The giant ape clumsily turned around and looked at Ling Yunha. In the end, it started to chase after Ling Yunha. The others breathed sighs of relief and immediately scattered, choosing a direction to fly away. Among them, Ling Yunfei was always protecting Tian Jiqian, advancing and retreating together with him. Mo Tiange also chose a direction at random. Just as she was about 10 miles away, Fei Fei's voice entered her ears. "Master, I'll go take a look." Just now, she didn't fasten the spiritual beast pouch, so when it spoke, Fei Fei had already jumped out and ran back. Fei Fei, Mo Tiange stopped for a moment, then chased after it. "What are you doing?" "Master, don't move." Fei Fei turned around and looked at her. "I won't be in danger, but you won't necessarily be safe if you go. Seeing Fei turn around again and nimbly disappear among the rocks, Tinga helplessly patted her head. How could she forget that Fei was no longer the Fei from before? Now it was her, its master, who was being despised. But since Fei said so, there shouldn't be any danger, right? Fei could live in peace with other spiritual beasts, even ferocious beasts. However, this giant ape was clearly a monster, so she didn't know whether it could be counted as a spiritual beast or not. With that thought in mind, Tinga hesitated for a moment but still flew back. She just slowed down her speed. When she returned to her original position, there was no one around. The others had already scattered and fled for their lives. There was no trace of Fei or that giant ape. Tinga thought for a moment, then laid a defense formation around her and sat down cross-legged. She trusted Fei's ability. Even if something were to happen, she would be here to support her. After a while, a cultivator's aura appeared around her. His cultivation level should be in the middle stage of the core formation realm. A black shadow flew closer and closer. It was Tiancan. Upon seeing Tinga, he hesitated for a moment, then walked towards her. Fellow Taoist Qin, you didn't leave? Tinga didn't know how to explain this to him, so she said, "No, I just came back." "How come fellow Taoist Tiancan also came back?" Tiancan looked around and said, "I waited for a long time and thought it might be safer, so I came back to take a look." "Fellow Taoist Qinwei, how long have you been back? How's the situation?" Tinga shook her head. "I came back not long ago. There's been no movement, so I don't know what's going on." Tiancan was silent. After a while, he also sat down next to her and waited. The two of them sat cross-legged. After waiting for a long time, they sensed another cultivator's aura coming from the edge of their divine senses. This time, it was Yang Qingji who came back. His face was pale, the corners of his mouth were stained with blood, and he staggered. Upon seeing Tinga and Tiancan, he was startled. He narrowed his eyes, and vigilance flashed across his eyes. "Fellow Taoists, why did you come back? Didn't fellow Taoist Yang also come back?" Tiancan snorted with a displeased attitude. Tiancan's words softened Yang Qingji's attitude. He said, "I encountered a 6th-rank magical beast about 50 kilometers away from here. Since I was injured, I could only barely kill it. If I flew further, I didn't know what kind of strange things I would encounter, so I simply turned back." No wonder he looked so distressed. It seemed he had gone through another hard battle. Tinga looked at Yang Qingji and asked, "How's fellow Taoist Yang's injury?" Upon hearing her question, Yang Qingji looked at her vigilantly and said, "It's not a big deal. I just need to rest for a while." Tinga nodded. "Fellow Taoist Yang, you should take this opportunity to rest for a while." Yang Qingji cautiously looked at the two of them for a long time until Tiancan said impatiently, "What are you afraid of? We won't get any benefits from killing you now. Even if we get your magic weapon, it'll be useless if we can't get out." Upon hearing this, Yang Qingji's expression became a little better. He nodded at Tinga, then sat down in her formation and swallowed some medicinal pills to heal his injury. Tinga looked at him, shook her head helplessly, and looked away. Yang Qingji was even more suspicious than she was. He didn't dare to believe others who were nice to him, but Tiancan was rude to him, so he didn't doubt him. The three of them sat there for a long time, but nothing happened. Ling Yunhe didn't come back, and the giant ape didn't turn around. "Fellow Taoist Qin," Tiancan said, "what do you think is the current situation?" Tinga opened her eyes and pondered for a while. Then she said, "No news is good news." Tiancan was stunned. Then he sighed and nodded. She was right. In this situation, if there was news, it would most likely not be good news. They had seen the giant ape's ability with their own eyes. Ling Yunhe was definitely not its match if he went alone. Even if he could escape safely, he couldn't come out unscathed. Thinking about this, the three of them were a little dumbfounded. They were worried Ling Yunhe would turn against them later, but they didn't expect he would be willing to lead the danger away in the face of danger. Did he have a secret method to escape, or was he really trustworthy? Emotinga thought about it for a long time and sighed inwardly. The higher one's cultivation level was, the more cautious they were and the more they didn't dare to trust the kindness of others. When the danger came just now, if everyone ran for their lives separately, maybe they wouldn't be as confused as they were now. After all, although they were invited by Ling Yunhe, they all received benefits from him. It was just a business deal, not a friendship. Of course, when she thought of Fei Fei, Tinga felt Ling Yunhe was most likely still alive. But she also couldn't figure out the reason why Ling Yunhe made such a decision. In this cultivation world, it was too difficult to believe other people just had good intentions. Chapter 379. After a while, Tinga suddenly looked in the direction the giant ape left and said, "It's coming." Yang Qingji and Tiansan's expressions changed greatly. They sensed a mixed breath, and it was the strong breath of the giant ape. The two of them stood up and were about to separate when Tinga said, "Fellow Taoists, please wait." Yang Qingji turned around and glared at her. Does fellow Taoist Qin have a way to subdue this thing? After what happened just now, Tinga knew Yang Qingji was more suspicious than she was, so she didn't take it seriously and said to Tiancan, "Fellow Taoist, if you believe me, please wait here." Tiancan looked suspicious. What does fellow Taoist Qin want to do? At this time, the giant ape's breath got closer. Under the cover of its mixed breath, the three of them sensed another spiritual breath, which seemed to be a fifth-rank demonic beast. Tinga shook her head with a smile and turned to Yang Qingji. "Fellow Taoist Yang, if you don't want to take risks, you can leave now." Yang Qingji looked at her, then stared at Tiancan for a while, but in the end, he didn't move. He really wanted to know why this woman was so calm. Was there something else she wanted to hide? The giant ape's figure soon appeared in front of them. Yang Qingji and Tiancan both held their magic weapons and were ready to attack. However, the next moment, Tinga looked up and saw the little thing sitting on the giant ape's shoulder. She waved at it. Fei Fei. Upon seeing her, Fei Fei squeaked, jumped down from the giant ape's shoulder, and threw itself into her arms. "Master, don't let others know I can talk." At the same time, Fei Fei's lazy voice rang in her head. "What do you want now?" Tinga replied with her divine comprehension. Fei Fei buried its head on Tinga's shoulder and chuckled in her mind. "You're hiding your true colors. A spiritual beast that can talk will arouse other people's greed." Tinga asked, "Did you deal with that thing?" Fei Fei sounded a little dissatisfied. "It's not called that thing. It's called a stone. It actually has a name." Tinga was surprised. Fei Fei was even more dissatisfied. "Names aren't exclusive to you humans. Look at Xiaofan's family. They even have surnames." "Fellow Taoist Qin, what's going on?" Yang Qingji asked after recovering from his shock. "This thing, it's not attacking us." Tinga patted Fei Fei's head and imitated the cloud-soaring crane. She fed it a spiritual panacea as a reward, then once again released it to play with the giant ape. Yang Qingji and Tiancan watched as the ape and the fox slowly walked away. Their questioning gazes immediately fell on Tinga. Facing their gazes, Tinga was very calm. "This is my spiritual beast. It's a Fei Fei." "Fei Fei." Yang Qingji was confused. "What's that?" Tinga said, "If it knows fellow Taoist Yang called it something, it'll definitely be unhappy." "I do have this idea." Yang Qingji didn't hide anything. "If I raise it to the level of fellow Taoist Qin, it'll be very useful in times like this." Tiancan glanced at Yang Qingji and said, "Fellow Taoist Yang, you're a devil cultivator. As a devil, I'm afraid it's not easy for you to raise a spiritual beast, right?" Yang Qingji looked at him coldly. "As a Tao cultivator, Ling Yunhe even raised a strange beast that cultivates the aura of death. I'm a devil cultivator. Why can't I raise a spiritual beast?" The two of them stared at each other with anger in their eyes. Tinga felt helpless and said, "Fellow Taoists, This giant ape is solved for the time being. What should we do next? Do you have any opinions? Naturally, we'll find the others. Yang Qingji said, I was entrusted by someone, so I'll have to do it myself. Besides, his way of doing things can be considered acceptable. In the end, Tianqian didn't argue. And let's find the others first. The three of them agreed. Mo Tinga took out a talisman from inside her robe and flicked it with her finger. The talisman burst into flames and turned into a flight light, disappearing into the sky. Before they left, Ling Yunhe had prepared several plans. He also told everyone in advance how to deal with them if they got separated. Mo Tinga didn't need to say anything now. She immediately sent out a summoning talisman. As long as the other three were fine, they should come back and meet up with her. Not long after Mo Tinga sent out her summoning talisman, a sound-transmitting talisman came from the sky. Mo Tinga took it. The talisman burned without any fire, and Ling Yunfei's voice rang out. Fellow Taoist Qin, are you all right? Mo Tinga frowned slightly when she received this talisman. This Ling Yunfei wasn't as simple as she thought. If he had the time to send a sound-transmitting talisman, he might as well come back and meet up with her. He was actually quite cautious. I'm fine. Let's meet up quickly, Mo Tinga replied through a sound-transmitting talisman. After a while, two flight lights finally appeared at a low altitude. Before long, Ling Yunfei and Tian Jiqian landed on the ground. Fellow Taoists, you've arrived? Ling Yunfei looked at Yang Qingji and Tianqian in surprise. We went back a long time ago, Tianqian said faintly. Oh, Ling Yunfei looked at the three of them and asked with a puzzled expression, what's going on? Fellow Taoists, can you explain it to us? Tianqian and Yang Qingji weren't used to explaining, so they naturally looked at Mo Tinga after hearing what he said. Mo Tinga had no choice but to tell Ling Yunfei and Tian Jiqian what happened just now. I see. After listening to the whole story, Ling Yunfei's eyes flashed with excitement. He asked Mo Tinga, fellow Taoist Qin, where did you get that spiritual beast? Mo Tinga smiled. Fellow Taoist Yang also asked me this question. To be honest, it's been a long time. I only remember it's the North Sea, but I don't remember where it is. Oh, Ling Yunfei looked disappointed. The five of them waited for a while, but they still didn't see any trace of Ling Yunhe. Ling Yunfei couldn't wait any longer and asked first, did something happen to my second brother? He hasn't come back for so long. That's hard to say. Tianqian snorted. The giant ape was attracted away by Fei Fei, but before that, none of us knew whether fellow Taoist Ling was still alive or not. This Tianqian. It was fine if he didn't say anything, but as soon as he did, he always said unpleasant things. Mo Tinga thought for a while, then called Fei Fei back with her divine comprehension. Before long, Fei Fei appeared in everyone's line of sight, but the giant ape was nowhere to be seen. Squeak! In everyone's eyes, Fei Fei wagged its tail and pounced on Mo Tinga, staying motionless on her body. At that moment, Fei Fei's impatient voice rang in Mo Tinga's mind. Why did you call me back? Mo Tinga stroked its head, pretending to comfort the spiritual beast. With a smile on her face, she communicated with Fei Fei using her divine comprehension. I have to ask you, where's your stone? Of course it went home. Fei Fei rubbed its head. Is that what you want to ask? Of course not. Did you ask it where the person it was chasing just now was? Fei Fei tilted its head and thought for a while, then jumped down from her body. He seems to have escaped, but I'm very familiar with his breath. I can find him. Let's go. Mo Tinga waved her hand at the others. It'll take us to fellow Taoist Ling. The other four people looked at each other and finally followed her. Although it was Fei Fei's first time in Carefree Valley, it seemed to be very familiar with its surroundings. It jumped left and right, jumped over several piles of rocks, and finally stopped in front of a big tree. Squeak! It called. Here! With a glance, Mo Tinga saw Ling Yunhe lying under the tree, breathing weakly. Chapter 380. You're awake? Before Ling Yunhe opened his eyes, he heard a voice in his ears. The voice wasn't hostile, and he didn't feel any killing intent around him. So he thought blankly for a while before he rubbed his eyelids and opened his eyes. He was in a dark space. The top of his head was deep and dark, and he didn't know where it led to. He was surrounded by tangle vines, looking very dirty. He was lying on the moist soil with only a thin robe between him and the ground. He could even smell the fragrance of the soil. The spiritual aura inside his body circulated unimpeded, which startled him. He already had internal injuries, and he was attacked several times. In the end, he fainted due to the recoil of his aura. He thought his injuries were serious, but he didn't expect that his meridians and dantian were still intact when he woke up. He just lost some strength. Fellow Taoist Ling? Mo Tinga frowned when she saw the dazed Ling Yunhe in front of her. Could it be that his injuries were too serious and he hadn't recovered yet? Hearing her voice, Ling Yunhe's attention slowly focused and finally focused on her face. So it's fellow Taoist Qin. Ling Yunhe nodded at her, then turned to look at his surroundings and asked, "Did you save me?" Mo Tinga shook her head. "I didn't do it alone." She spoke politely, but Ling Yunhe felt a bit grateful. He sat up, looked around, then looked down at himself, and found that he didn't lose his magic weapon, and the spiritual beast vulture was still in his spiritual beast bag. He finally felt relieved. Where is this? Where are the others? How are they? They're all resting. This is a tree hole, Mo Tinga answered. Oh. Ling Yunhe nodded and touched his chest. What happened to my injuries? Mo Tinga said lightly, I happen to have some healing medicinal pills. After fellow Taoist Yunfei exchanged them with me and examined them, I gave them to you. Really? Ling Yunhe pressed his dantian and took a deep look at Mo Tinga. Fellow Taoist Qin's medicinal pills are really extraordinary. I thank you. He was well aware of his own injuries. There were internal injuries in his dantian, and on top of that, he had forcefully stimulated his Zhen Yuan to escape from the giant ape's pursuit. It could be said that even if he returned alive and won the position of sect leader, it would take him years or even decades to recover to his original state. But now, Mo Tinga's medicinal pills managed to control his injuries in time, leaving only some residual injuries. If he could recuperate properly, it could save him at least half of the time. More importantly, his current injuries were not serious, so he had a greater chance of winning the sect leader selection. Seeing that Mo Tinga only smiled and didn't answer, Ling Yunhe continued to ask, By the way, what happened in the end? How did you find me? Where's that giant ape? After Mo Tinga succinctly explained what happened, Ling Yunhe stared at her and said with joy, So that's how it is. In that case, my biggest fortune this time is that I was able to invite fellow Taoist Qin to accompany me. If it wasn't for Mo Tinga, although he managed to escape from the giant ape's clutches, fainting in Carefree Valley alone would have been a matter of 9 deaths and 1 life. And other people wouldn't have been able to find him so quickly. Now, he only felt lucky. He invited Mo Tinga because he thought she had a lot of spiritual treasures, was steady in handling matters, and her cultivation level was also pretty good, so she should be able to help him. He didn't expect her to be of such great use. Mo Tinga just smiled at him. Her scrutinizing gaze fell on him, and she suddenly asked, Fellow Taoist Ling, why did you lure the giant ape away by yourself? Weren't you afraid of losing your life? Ling Yunhe rubbed the space between his eyebrows and said tiredly, I thought I had some secret techniques, so I should have been able to escape. It's just that I didn't expect my injuries to be too serious. Although I managed to escape, I couldn't hold on for a while. He then turned to look at Mo Tinga and asked, How about you? How's fellow Taoist Yang's injuries? And Mo Tinga said, Fellow Taoist Yang's injuries looked terrible, but they didn't damage his dantian or meridians. Devil cultivators' bodies are stronger than ours, so presumably he'll recover soon. That's good. Ling Yunhe heaved a sigh of relief and smiled. Then we can continue. Fellow Taoist Ling Tinga's gaze flickered. Everything you did was to let the search for the fretless fruit proceed smoothly? Ling Yunhe's smile froze. He stared at Imo Tiange, neither saying anything nor moving. After a while, he shifted his gaze away and said with a smile, I can only say that while we're still companions, you can trust me. Imo Tiange noticed he said, you instead of you. She frowned. Fellow Taoist Ling, why did you say that? Could it be that you think other people aren't trustworthy? Ling Yunhe shook his head and gave her a meaningful look. Fellow Taoist Qin, whether other people are trustworthy or not, you know very well. Imo Tiange was silent. They were all outstanding core formation cultivators. Because of this, they didn't dare to trust others easily and couldn't trust others easily. Apart from Ling Yunfei and Tian Jiqian, Tian Can was too mysterious, Yang Qingji was too suspicious, and she was too cautious. In fact, none of them were trustworthy. However, what Ling Yunhe said just now showed that he regarded her as a trustworthy person. Imo Tiange couldn't figure out what he was thinking. She tilted her head and thought for a while, then asked directly, do you think I'm trustworthy? Ling Yunhe showed a faint smile, then sighed tiredly again. At this moment, he didn't seem to mind showing his exhaustion in front of Imo Tiange at all. I was selected as one of the candidates for the Heterogenean sect, so of course I have a good eye for people. People like fellow Taoist Qin can be befriended, but not bullied. If I treat you with courtesy, I'll return the courtesy, but if I always guard against you, I'll make you feel disgusted. Fellow Taoist Qin, am I right? Imo Tiange looked surprised. Even she herself hadn't thought about it carefully, but Ling Yunhe's conclusion made her think it was right. If people don't offend me, I won't offend them. If people offend me, I'll kill them. Ling Yunhe smiled when he saw the expression on Imo Tiange's face. This time, his smile wasn't like his usual one. Although it was cordial, it also kept people at a distance. Instead, it carried a bit of childlike complacency and a carefreeness without any burden. I'm right? Imo Tiange stared at the top of the tree for a long time, then smiled helplessly. If I didn't know better, I'd think fellow Taoist Ling and I have known each other for a long time. The smile on Ling Yunhe's face grew wider. After laughing for a while, he said, fellow Taoist Qin, why aren't you a man? Huh? Imo Tiange didn't understand. Ling Yunhe continued, it's not that I look down on women, but he paused for a long time and didn't finish his sentence. However, Imo Tiange somewhat understood what he meant. It was always more convenient to make friends with people of the same sex than with people of the opposite sex, and it was easier to become confidants. At this time, she suddenly thought of Nie Wuxiang. If it weren't for their opposing positions and those unclear grudges, maybe she and Nie Wuxiang could become confidants. She wondered how Nie Wuxiang was now. Did she find a way to control her own primordial devil aura? Fellow Taoist Qin? Imo Tiange regained her train of thought. Ling Yunhe looked at her and asked, are you thinking of someone else? Huh? As soon as she met Ling Yunhe's gaze, Imo Tiange knew he misunderstood. However, this misunderstanding didn't need to be explained, so she acquiesced. Upon seeing her expression, a trace of disappointment flashed across Ling Yunhe's eyes. When he realized this, he was startled. Fortunately, he heard Imo Tiange's question in time. Fellow Taoist Ling, since you know how to read people, what do you think of other people? Ling Yunhe thought for a while, then said, fellow Taoist Yang was recommended by Yunfei. He's quite famous among the core formation cultivators in Yunzhou. Don't underestimate him just because he's only in the early stage of the core formation realm. As the proud disciple of Guifeng Devil Monarch, one of the 3 devil monarchs in Yunzhou, his aptitude goes without saying. Moreover, it said that Guifeng Devil Monarch regarded him as his direct disciple and passed all his secret techniques to him. As long as he forms his nascent soul, after Guifeng Devil Monarch abdicates, he'll inherit the position of Guifeng City Lord. Guifeng City. Oh, Ling Yunhe said with a smile. I forgot again. Fellow Taoist Qin isn't a cultivator from Yunzhou, so you don't know much about the cultivation world in Yunzhou. Devil cultivators are quite different from us. They value individual ability more, so there aren't many so-called great sects like us. On the contrary, devil domains established by devil cultivators with great divine power are a bit more powerful. Guifeng City is a devil domain established by Guifeng Devil Monarch 1,000 years ago. In northern Chilean country, and even in the whole of Yunzhong, it has great power. It can be said that as Guifeng Devil Monarch's beloved disciple, Yang Qingji plays an important role in Yunzhong. I see. Mo Tiange was moved. Since fellow Taoist Yang has such an identity, he can get whatever he wants. Why would he take the risk to make a deal with fellow Taoist Ling? Upon hearing this question, Ling Yunhe faintly sighed. His gaze once again revealed his exhaustion. How could it be that easy? Although it's good to have a big tree to lean on, there'll always be conflicts when too many people fight for that little shade. No matter how glorious your identity is, you can't do as you please. Seeing his expression and thinking of the internal strife in Ling clan she heard before, Mo Tiange somewhat understood. In the eyes of outsiders, Ling Yunhe was very glorious. He was a genius disciple, loved by the old ancestor, valued by the sect, and could mobilize so many resources to participate in the sect head selection. However, because of this, he didn't get along well with his clansmen. They fought openly and secretly, and he even got injured. In order to avoid this, he pretended to be unable to restore his cultivation level and pretended to be down and out. The helplessness and depression in this matter was very difficult for outsiders to understand. Although Mo Tiange was also a disciple of a great sect, neither her master nor Qin she participated in the power struggle, and they also didn't have the burden of a clan, so they were always relaxed. She suddenly remembered that her master was a nascent soul cultivator and had a junior like Qin Shi, but he unexpectedly never thought about establishing a cultivation clan. Was it because of this reason? Guifeng Devil Monarch didn't only have one disciple. It's precisely because he's the most valued that some things are more difficult to handle. Ling Yunhe smiled and continued. As for that fellow Taoist Tianqian, he pondered for a while, then shook his head. I met that person by accident. He's very strong, but he's too mysterious. Even now, I still can't tell whether he's a friend or a foe. At this point, Ling Yunhe once again looked at Mo Tiange with a meaningful gaze. However, fellow Taoist Qin must have a good relationship with this fellow Taoist Tianqian. Mo Tiange smiled faintly and didn't explain further. What about your younger brother and fellow Taoist Tian? Ling Yunhe was stunned. What do they have to say? Mo Tiange understood and nodded. It seems they're the people fellow Taoist Ling trust the most. Of course, otherwise I wouldn't have asked them to come with me, Ling Yunhe said. Yunfei has been close to me since we were young. We're both from a branch family of Ling clan, and we're close in age. We've been supporting each other for so many years. As for Brother Tian, we've also been friends for many years. For me, he's even more reliable than some people with the same surname. In other words, the two of them are people I don't need to guard against. Ling Yunhe spoke from the bottom of his heart, as if he didn't hide anything. This kind of trust made Mo Tiange feel a bit overboard. She thought Ling Yunhe was right. With her character, she could be befriended but couldn't be deceived. Since other people trusted her, she couldn't do anything that betrayed their trust. This wasn't good. The more he said, the more she would be bound, wouldn't it? Chapter 381. Fellow Taoist Qin. Noticing that someone was approaching, the two of them stopped talking. Then Tiansan's voice came from outside. Fellow Taoist Tianqian. Mo Tiange raised her voice. Tianqian came in from the tree hole and nodded at the two of them. It seems fellow Taoist Ling's injuries are all right. Ling Yunhe showed a friendly but distant smile. Thank you for your concern, fellow Taoist Tianqian. Where are the others? How are they? Very good. Tiansan's eyes paused on the two of them for a while, then moved away as if nothing had happened. Fellow Taoist Yang said he's fine now. That's good. Ling Yunhe nodded, adjusted the spiritual aura in his body again, and stood up. Let's meet up. After Ling Yunhe walked out, Tiansan's gaze fell on Mo Tiange. Mo Tiange smiled indifferently. The conversation between her and Ling Yunhe didn't affect the agreement between her and Tiancan. If Ling Yunhe didn't turn hostile, she and Tiancan wouldn't have to turn against each other. If Ling Yunhe really had other intentions, she certainly wouldn't resign herself to death because of his words. The three of them walked out of the tree hole with their own thoughts. They found this tree hole when they found Ling Yunhe. This tree hole grew between a place with spiritual aura and a place with devil aura, but it wasn't affected by the two auras. No one knew how long it had been growing here, but it formed a natural tree hole, which was perfect for the heavily injured Ling Yunhe. As for the others, Yang Qingji went to the place with devil aura to heal himself. After Ling Yunhe settled down, Ling Yunfei adjusted his breath in a place with spiritual aura nearby. At this thought, Mo Tiange pondered. She came to see Ling Yunhe like this, but Tiancan followed her closely and Ling Yunhe was injured. Wasn't Ling Yunfei worried at all? She always felt Ling Yunhe trusted Ling Yunfei too much. He trusted him so much that he treated him like his own limbs. Not only did he not doubt him, but he also didn't seem to want to win him over. Mo Tiange hoped his trust would be reciprocated. Second brother, Ling Yunfei, rushed over in surprise when he saw Ling Yunhe. Are you really okay? Ling Yunhe smiled at him. Yes. Fellow Taoist Qin's medicinal pills are really miraculous. Yes, I have to thank fellow Taoist Qin. Ling Yunfei cupped his hands and bowed towards Mo Tiange. Mo Tiange said faintly, fellow Taoist Yunfei doesn't need to be too polite. I gave you the medicinal pills, but I also accepted your things. Ling Yunfei's healing medicinal pills didn't have any effect, so he used some materials to exchange with others. In the end, Mo Tiange took out her own medicinal pills. The two brothers talked for a while more, and Ling Yunfei excitedly ran off to find Yang Qingji. Very soon, the six of them met up again. Fellow Taoist Yang, how are your injuries? Ling Yunhe asked Yang Qingji with concern. Most of the devil qi on his body dissipated, revealing a pale and unruly face. This wasn't Mo Tiange's first time seeing Yang Qingji's true appearance, but she still found it very interesting. When he was surrounded by the demonic energy, Yang Qingji had always maintained a calm image. In the end, he discovered that he was still such a young and immature youth. The contrast was too great. It's fine. Yang Qingji's voice was low and his expression was wooden. Fellow Taoist Ling, you can continue to move at any time. Ling Yunhe looked at the others and said, that being the case, I won't talk nonsense. We've been delayed for a few days. If we stay in Carefree Valley any longer, even with the soul-restraining bead, our cultivation will be affected. Let's go now. We'll talk on the way. Brother Ling, how about your injuries? Tian Jichin asked. Although you've suppressed your injuries, if you fight, you seem to be a bit weak, right? It doesn't matter. Ling Yunhe said, fellow Taoist Qin's medicinal pills are very good. Now that my dantian and meridians are protected, I'll take some healing medicinal pills. It won't be a problem to fight. At most, it'll be a bit troublesome when we return. Is that so? Tian Jichin looked at Mo Tiange in surprise. I didn't expect fellow Taoist Qin to not only have outstanding magic weapons, but also have such miraculous medicinal pills. He originally thought it was just some strong healing medicinal pills. He didn't expect it could actually treat the injuries of her dantian and meridians. Mo Tiange smiled without saying anything. Among the people present who didn't have some spiritual treasures, she wasn't the only one. After a simple agreement, everyone packed up and once again set out on their journey. Ling Yunhe said the carefree fruit could grow anywhere in Carefree Valley. Moreover, it could burrow into the ground and escape like a living thing. Therefore, they had no other choice but to walk all over Carefree Valley. Carefree Valley was too big, so the process of finding the fruit definitely wouldn't be easy. Before encountering the 3 giant apes, they had just entered the valley, so they hadn't gone to many places yet. From now on, there are many places they had to search, so they couldn't waste any more time. Ling Yunhe and Yang Chengji were injured, so they stayed at the back. Ling Yunfei and Tian Can led the way, while they and Tian Jiqian walked in the middle. Mo Tiange stayed at the back. After walking for a while, Tian Jiqian turned around and deliberately stopped, waiting for Mo Tiange to catch up. Fellow Taoist Qin. Mo Tiange vigilantly paid attention to her surroundings while nodding calmly. Fellow Taoist Tian, what's the matter? Tian Jiqian hesitated for a moment before saying, when we encountered the giant apes a few days ago, I saw fellow Taoist Qin's magic weapon seem to be a formation tool. Mo Tiange said, it can't be considered a formation tool. It just has the ability of an illusory formation. Tian Jiqian's eyes brightened. This kind of magic weapon is rare. Could fellow Taoist Qin tell me more about it? He added, if it's not convenient, fellow Taoists can talk to me about the Tao formations. Let's forget about the magic weapon. Before Mo Tiange could say anything, Ling Yunhe, who was walking in front of them, turned around and said with a smile, fellow Taoist Qin, this brother Tian of mine doesn't have any hobbies in his life, but he likes to study the Tao of formations. He's eager to hunt now. If you don't tell him, he'll be itching for several days. If you don't have any secrets, fellow Taoist, please tell me. There's nothing to hide, Mo Tiange said with a smile. It's just that when I was refining the magic weapon, I added some formation-laying methods. A formation expert like fellow Taoist Tian will understand after listening to me. Soon after, Mo Tiange briefly told Tian Jiqian about the illusory formation in the heaven and earth fan. In fact, the illusory formation in the heaven and earth fan wasn't exquisite, but it was a natal magic weapon that could always be nourished in the Dantian. If there was anything wrong with it, it could always be modified. Therefore, even if she told Tian Jiqian now, he couldn't just break the illusory formation in the heaven and earth fan. After all, the Tao of formations focused on practicality. Even aura refining formation masters knew the basic Tao of yin and yang of the 5 elements like the back of their hands. However, if they wanted to use it in formations, they needed a deep understanding of it and a subtle grasp of spiritual aura. In this regard, the advantage of the heaven and earth fan was obvious. It could change according to its master's will. Every time it laid an illusory formation, it would be different. As long as the foundation of the illusory formation was grasped, the heaven and earth fan could change itself at will. Tian Jiqian's eyes lit up, and he nodded repeatedly. Most of the cultivators in our 5 Elements Valley's natal magic weapons are formation-laying tools, but none of them are like fellow Taoist Qin. You can move and stay still, attack and defend at the same time. Not only can you lay formations at any time, but you can also use spells to break the enemy. It turns out fellow Taoist Qin has such profound attainments in formations. I've benefited a lot from your words. Thank you, thank you. As he spoke, he bowed repeatedly. Mo Tiange smiled and said, although I've learned the Tao of formation from my family, I'm not a formation master like fellow Taoist Tian. The reason I was able to refine this kind of magic weapon was because of my elder's guidance. I didn't do it alone. Oh, Tian Jiqian became even more excited. May I know where fellow Taoist Qin lives? Can I pay you a visit? This. Mo Tiange shook her head awkwardly. Fellow Taoist Tian should know that I've lived in the outer endless sea for a long time, which is quite far from Yinzhou. I'm afraid it won't be convenient. Oh, Tian Jiqian looked disappointed. Brother Tian, Ling Yunhe turned around and said with a smile, if worst comes to worst, we'll invite fellow Taoist Qin to stay in our Ling clan for a while after this is done. You two can exchange more about the Tao formations. You're right. Tian Jiqian became happy again. He cupped his hands towards Mo Tiange and said, fellow Taoist Qin, please don't refuse. I also want to invite fellow Taoist Qin to our 5 Elements Valley to exchange more pointers with us. Mo Tiange smiled. It's also my honor to exchange pointers with the formation masters of 5 Elements Valley. Then it's a deal, Tian Jiqian said hurriedly, afraid she'd go back on her word. Tinga smiled helplessly. Although she was proficient in the Tao of formations, she might not be as good as a master like Tian Jiqian. However, when he heard there was a formation technique he didn't know, he eagerly asked for advice. He was really an idiot. Second brother, Ling Yunfei turned around and said hesitantly, "There seems to be something in front of us." Tinga had long noticed that the fluctuation of breath in front of them was unusual. Ling Yunha's divine sense wasn't inferior to hers, so he must have noticed it long ago. However, his expression remained the same, so he must have already prepared a countermeasure. Sure enough, Ling Yunha said calmly, "I know. Continue." "Oh." Ling Yunfei turned around and continued to lead the way. After walking for a while, they saw a stone forest filled with oddly shaped rocks. Ling Yunfei and Tianqian stopped in their tracks. Second brother, this is, between the strange stones in the stone forest, there were spiritual light and devil light visible to the naked eye, as well as light particles floating in the air. In all her years of life, Tinga had never seen such a strange and bizarre scene. In the inner valley of Carefree Valley, spiritual aura, devil aura, and filthy aura were intertwined and distributed as if they were demarcated on a chessboard. Each had its own territory and didn't interfere with the other. The outer valley, on the other hand, was a place where the three chi intersected and the chi was chaotic. Once cultivators entered, their chi would be affected and become unstable. They needed the spirit-restraining orb and Tian Jiqian's array to display their usual strength. But in this stone forest, it was completely different from the outer valley and the other places in the inner valley. It could be said that its aura was mixed, but the three auras all turned into spiritual light and danced in the air. It could be said that its aura was stable, but the filthy aura of spirit and devil aura were mixed together, so ordinary people couldn't step in at all. Chapter 382. Ling Yunha took out a jade bottle from his Chinkoan bag and raised his hand. The jade bottle flew up and floated in the air. "Brother Tian," Ling Yunha shouted. Tian Jiqian immediately answered, "I know." As he spoke, he pointed with his spiritual aura, and the jade plate in his hand spun rapidly. Right at that moment, a puff of smoke rose from the jade bottle in the air. Suddenly, a refreshing fragrance appeared in their surroundings, making them feel refreshed. The spiritual aura inside their bodies started to circulate faster. On Tian Jiqian's jade plate, yin and yang flashed, and the five elements moved from slow to fast and from fast to slow. After a long time, it finally stopped. When a needle on the jade plate stopped completely, Tian Jiqian pointed with his right hand and shot out an invisible spiritual energy. "Stop." A steady force flowed out, and the light of the three chi in the surroundings suddenly stopped, no longer drifting. Ling Yunha immediately jumped up. An ordinary cloth bag appeared in his hand. He began to wave it left and right, collecting the light particles condensed from the three chis into the bag, as if they were tangible beads. As he waved the cloth bag, the light particles in the stone forest became fewer and fewer, gradually clearing a path. After a while, Ling Yunha finally stopped. He wiped his face and said to the others, "Fellow Taoist Qin, fellow Taoist Tianqian, use your spiritual aura to protect us." Tinga and Tianqian nodded. They then used their auras to form a spiritual aura barrier around the six of them, blocking the light of the three chis outside. "Second brother, are your injuries okay?" Ling Yunfei asked. "They're fine. It's just a loss of spiritual aura." "All right, let's not waste time. Let's go." The six of them entered the passage. When they reached the end, Ling Yunha handed the cloth bag to Ling Yunfei. Ling Yunfei used the same method to clear a path. Although Ling Yunfei's cultivation level wasn't high, he wasn't bad at spells. Moreover, the stone forest wasn't too deep, so the path was cleared very quickly. When the six of them were about to walk out of the stone forest, the jade bottle in the air suddenly swayed and fell from above. "Brother Ling," Tian Jiqian reacted quickly. and hurriedly retreated as he shouted. Seeing this, Ling Yunhe's expression changed. He crossed his hands and made a set of complicated hand seals, hitting the jade bottle. Halfway to the ground, the cloud-ascending crane caught the jade bottle and stopped its fall. However, it could not stabilize itself. It swayed as if it was struggling between two forces. Ling Yunhe's face flushed red as he struggled to form another set of hand seals. Finally, the jade bottle slowly stabilized. Seeing this, everyone heaved a sigh of relief. Just as they were about to continue forward, the three lights that had been cleared suddenly flashed again, intertwining to form a net that trapped the six of them in the center. At the same time, the fragrance emitted by the jade bottle suddenly disappeared. What's going on? Yang Chengji looked around and said, It seems like the aura has suddenly become chaotic. Everyone else felt what he said. The moment Ling Yunhe's jade bottle swayed, the originally stable light of the three qi in the stone forest suddenly became chaotic. It seemed that there was no order to follow, and it began to crisscross chaotically. This situation was a little similar to when they first entered the outer valley, but the three qis here were even more complicated and intertwined, making the situation even more complicated and inexplicably strange. What should we do? Ling Yunfei turned around and asked Ling Yunhe. Ling Yunhe's face turned green, and he didn't say anything for a long time. The fragrance emitted by the jade bottle was a kind of spiritual item that could refresh one's spirit. It could temporarily increase their strength while they were surrounded by the light of the three qi. Under such circumstances, Tian Jiqian used the jade plate to stabilize the yin, yang, and 5 elements in the surroundings, and then used the cloth bag to clear the light of the three qi. This way, it wouldn't cause the surrounding aura to become turbulent and cause more variables. But now, the power of the light of the three qi exceeded his estimation. The jade bottle couldn't hold on any longer. Without the jade bottle's help, Tian Jiqian's ability wasn't strong enough to maintain the secret technique. The stable situation they previously maintained collapsed in an instant. What should we do? Mo Tianga's mind was also spinning quickly. Should she help Tian Jiqian stabilize the yin, yang, and 5 elements in the surroundings and let him use the technique again? No. Tian Jiqian's face was pale. Obviously, he used too much of his spiritual aura just now. Ordinary core formation cultivators couldn't use techniques like stabilizing the yin, yang, and 5 elements. Even if he wanted to use it now, he might not be able to. Should he protect his spiritual aura and rush out? That wouldn't work either. The light of the three qi was too strange. It definitely couldn't be withstood by a simple spiritual aura protection. Before she could figure out what to do, Ling Yunhe suddenly took out the spirit confining bead from his robe. He touched the space between his eyebrows, forcing out a drop of blood essence and smearing it on the spirit confining bead. In an instant, the bead shone brightly and flew into the air. When the spirit confining bead's light and the light of the three qi collided, a low, buzzing sound rang out. Everyone felt their minds go into a trance, and the surrounding aura changed again. The spirit confining bead's light carried a formidable power, wanting to subdue the light of the three qi. The light of the three qi was unwilling to be subdued and resisted with all its strength. The two forces were both very powerful and began to compete with each other. Comparatively speaking, the momentum of the spirit confining bead was a bit stronger. Since this bead was Ling clan's heirloom, it wasn't easily revealed in front of others, so it naturally had its own peculiarities. Just now, Ling Yunhe fed it blood essence, so its momentum was even more astonishing. However, although the momentum of the light of the three qi was inferior, they were connected and supported each other, while the spirit confining bead was isolated and helpless. As time went by, the light of the spirit confining bead became weaker and weaker, while the light of the three qi became brighter and brighter. "No!" Ling Yunfei shouted. "Second brother, this won't do. The spirit confining bead's power isn't enough." How could Ling Yunhe not know? The spirit confining bead could control the chaotic spiritual energy around it, but it couldn't sort it out. It could only subdue it. However, to subdue it required a much more powerful force. If it wasn't enough, then it could only be destroyed. However, he couldn't think of any other way. He was good at fighting, but not at dealing with this kind of chaotic situation. This was why he specially asked Tian Jiqian to come with him. But now, Tian Jiqian was powerless even though he wanted to. Seeing that the light of the spirit confining bead was getting weaker and weaker, the others knew that they couldn't rely on it anymore. They weren't people who would wait for death without a fight. In an instant, they all used their own techniques. Yang Qingji's ghost face banner unfurled. Demonic energy gathered, forming a line that surrounded the six of them. Tian didn't say a word. Suddenly, he punched the ground fiercely, causing dust to fly up and forming a circle of wind around the six of them. Ling Yunfei threw out a small flag. The small flag grew in the wind and became as big as a mat, withstanding the pressure from above. Just then, there was another buzz. The light of the spirit confining bead suddenly extinguished, and it fell from the sky. Ling Yunhe reached out to take it, his face ashen. This spirit confining bead was personally given to him by the Ling family's nascent soul stage ancestors. This represented their trust and expectation towards him. But now, the light of the spirit confining bead was extinguished, and it had lost all its power. Even if it wasn't destroyed, its vitality was greatly damaged. If he could successfully bring the carefree fruit back and obtain the position of sect leader, this price would be worth it. But now, they were surrounded by the light of 3 Qi. They might not even be able to keep their lives. There was no time to think. After the spirit confining bead was extinguished, the other three's defensive methods were met with a strong impact. Luckily, although the three of them looked troubled, they were able to hold on. Ling Yunfei held on with difficulty for a while. With a pale face, he shouted, "Second brother, we can't. We have to find a way to stabilize our aura. Otherwise, they would be like a lone boat on the sea in a storm, torn to pieces by the waves." Ling Yunhe didn't say a word and reached into his spirit beast pouch. The fifth-rank vulture let out an ear-piercing cry and rushed out. Death energy filled the air, blocking the filthy energy that was rushing towards them. Mo Tinga shook her sleeve, and the Tai Chi 8 trigrams diagram was thrown into the air. With a flash of spiritual light, the scroll slowly unfolded. As the Tai Chi 8 trigrams diagram unfolded, waves of spiritual aura rippled around the scroll. This wave of light slowly spread, and wherever it reached, the aura fluctuations gradually stabilized. Upon seeing this, Ling Yunhe was overjoyed. Fellow Taoist Qin, the spirit confining bead's function in breaking restrictions was superior to the Tai Chi 8 trigrams diagram. However, the real use of the Tai Chi 8 trigrams diagram was to sort out spiritual aura and stabilize yin, yang, and the 5 elements. After a while, the spiritual aura and devil aura were sorted out by the Tai Chi 8 trigrams diagram, leaving only the filthy aura drifting around. However, as long as the spiritual aura fluctuation stabilized, this wasn't a difficult thing for the 6 of them. Tian Jiqian swallowed a medicinal pill, then spun the jade plate again, quickly laying an invisible formation. Soon after, Ling Yunhe threw out a defensive magic weapon, which formed several lines of defense with the others' defensive magic weapons. With the addition of the vulture's dead aura, the situation finally stabilized. When the 6 of them came out of the stone forest, they all felt exhausted. Ling Yunhe and Yang Qingji were injured. Ling Yunfei and Tian Jiqian cleared the 3 auras, and Mo Tinga and Tian Can used their aura to protect the others. In the end, the 6 of them attacked together, almost using all their trump cards, and their spiritual aura was greatly damaged. However, Mo Tinga still had it easy. She had the primal chaos origin, so her spiritual aura circulation was fast. In addition, She had the Tai Chi 8 trigrams diagram in her sleeve, so she was less affected by the three auras intertwining. When they came out, the six of them were so exhausted that they almost couldn't care less about their appearances. They directly sat on the ground, panting heavily. After a while, Ling Yunfei calmed down and looked back at the stone forest with lingering fear. Fortunately, the fretless fruit isn't here. Otherwise, it would have been troublesome. Ling Yunha had already calmed down and was sitting cross-legged to adjust his breath. When he heard what Mo Tinga said, he shook his head. It's better here. Although the three auras in the stone forest are troublesome, there's always a way to solve them. It's always troublesome to find a fretless fruit, but it'll be easy once we find it. Second brother, Ling Yunfei, was dissatisfied. We almost died in there, but you make it sound so easy. Ling Yunha didn't take it seriously and said with a smile, these fellow Taoists aren't ordinary people. They won't die so easily. As he spoke, he glanced at the others one by one and finally fixed his gaze on Mo Tinga. Fellow Taoist Qin, I have to thank you this time. Fortunately, you have such a treasure. Mo Tinga was leaning against a tree to rest. She was the most relaxed among the six of them, but she also consumed a lot of spiritual aura. Right now, she swallowed some high-grade restorative panaceas and took several middle-grade spirit stones to replenish her spiritual aura. Upon hearing Ling Yunha's voice, she opened her eyes. Even without my magic weapon, fellow Taoist should have been able to escape safely. Fellow Taoist Ling is too polite. But with this thing, it'll be a lot easier for us. Ling Yunha, who was still staring at her, suddenly asked, fellow Taoist Qin, where did you get such an amazing spiritual treasure? You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.